Chapter 21, Glasgow Subjugation Expedition 1. The true nature of Sylvania's failed swordmaster would start to appear the more you play it. The game was filled with small details that unexpectedly had an intent and meaning. Not to mention the fact that the story was full of hidden episodes where you could learn new things about characters, even the ones who were already out of the story. The game put so much effort into fleshing out the characters of various students, the faculty, and the side characters, that it created an immersive experience for the player. This was what made the players want to play the next episode immediately after finishing a chapter. This was also why it felt so impossibly unfair that I became a character whose role was done the minute the story began, and then, later on, was shown as a beggar. But that wasn't my point. My point was that, given how huge the story was, it was obvious how all characters could be given the same level of importance. It was only natural that there would be important and influential characters, and characters who would just be there in the backdrop. But there was at least one time when I felt this shouldn't have been the case. Inquirer Glast was the Act 2 boss, while the Awakened Lucy would be for Act 3, and of course, Act 4's boss was the head of the house, Kreppenroth's tailor. It was clear the developers put more effort into making these bosses. They all had a variety of motives and circumstances and were coming from different backgrounds, resulting in a situation where they were blocking the main character Taily. Defeating each boss gave the players a strange sense of appreciation for their aesthetics and their values, and the variety of powers they possessed. But that feeling didn't exist for the Act 1 boss, Yennefer Polarover. She was the only boss who had no sense of identity. She fell victim to the whispers of the high-ranking dark spirit Velisper. She released all the spirits she made contracts with using Velispers, berserk, and wreaked havoc on the student center atop Nail Hall. Yennefer stood there and watched as the darkness took over the buildings. It definitely had some great impact. It left a strong first impression on players due to the gap between that image and when she was running around campus full of energy. But that was it. The Glasgow Subjugation Expedition marked the end of Act 1. It was the episode where Tail realized the ways of the sword and succeeded in cutting down a high-ranking spirit for the first time, signaling the start of the game's grand story. I even had to consult an online guide to beat the chapter because the difficulty level was quite high. What was the nickname of the person who wrote the strategy? Was it Peppero? But yeah, it was such an old distant memory that it seemed useless to think about it now. Anyway, my point was that Yennefer was pushed to the sidelines due to the entire chapter focusing on Taily's growth. Her story, and thus, many parts about her ended up becoming unknown. All they said about her was how she fell victim to the cruel whispers of Velisper and had her heart swallowed up by the darkness. It was so vague, what else could I do but move on? But I knew the game would never waste such an important character like that. They didn't even use some other character, but specifically used Yennefer as the final boss of Act 1. There must definitely be a reason, or maybe a message they were trying to convey. But till the very end of the game, no such thing was found. I passionately analyzed and thought about this plot point a lot as a dedicated fan of the game. But I didn't have many clues to go on. Maybe there were parts that got cut off during the production. Or maybe during the quality control inspection process. In the end, this part of the game left me feeling unsatisfied. Oh well, there wasn't anything that could be done about it anyway. Just as I thought. I need to build a cabin, I said with full determination. I had already raised my vitality. I was now able to prepare materials faster using magic. And I had already gathered food to the extent that I didn't need to worry about what to eat the next day. With these things established, I needed to start working on the basics to survive in the forest long term. I couldn't even lie and tell you the wooden shelter I had right now was durable. It wasn't useful enough for the amount of work I do to maintain it. A shelter without a proper roof and walls would have awful heating options. Of course, the weather was still good as it was still spring, but I had to take into consideration the fact that I had to spend 3 winters in this forest. This wooden shelter couldn't guarantee me a safe living accommodation, given how it kept on falling apart every other day. But not only that, my production skills would exponentially increase if I were to do long-term projects like building a wood cabin. This would be a great opportunity for me to raise my daily life production skills in one go, given how its increase had gotten slower. My handicraft proficiency had been stuck at level 10 for a while now, and my design proficiency's growth had been too slow, although this was indeed relatively difficult to raise compared to other skills. The goal was to utilize Ed Rothstahler's innate talent in production. The only option for him was to focus on developing his production skills, which would positively affect his stats. This was no different from reality or other games. If you had a special talent, take advantage of it. Come to think of it, I heard he already defeated the mid-stage boss for Act 1. It seemed that there hadn't been any unexpected variables that would change the story's original progression. Lucy did beat Taylor up pretty badly during the joint combat practice, but it didn't seem to be too big of a variable given how he still defeated the mid-stage boss, Nosy Elvira, from the alchemy department. It was said that she passed out after being hit by Taylor. I also hear Princess Peenia frequently visited the student council, and there had already been talks among faculty members about her being a candidate as the next student council president. There was also the episode where Lortel reconciled with Yennecar, and seeing how Lortel's visit was a while ago, things seemed to be going well on that front as well. There was no reason for me to worry about the story's progression given how everything seemed to be going according to the timeline that I knew of. Besides, why'd I keep on worrying about things I could do nothing about? What I needed to do was continue developing myself and taking care of the things I needed to do so I can live a comfortable life. I need to make myself busy. I still had a bit of time before Act 1 finished. I also had to solve my tuition issue. Thankfully, my grades are coming along fairly decently, so I thought I could expect some surprisingly positive results. I began cleaning the fish I caught on my farm with a satisfied smile on my face. I actually caught a fairly large rockfish. This would be my first time cooking a fish like it, so I thought a lot about how I should go about approaching it. Well, simple salt on the grill should make it delicious. Yeah, I should cook that for dinner. And using the herbs I had collected with Bel Maya's advice, I would also make some fragrant herbal tea to drink while I study later in the evening. Yennecar Polarover took over the student center the evening after tomorrow. The final phase of Act 1 came a month earlier. It was a catastrophic and unexpected change. This is a summary of the basic information and strategies. 1 to 10 Act 1, Final Chapter. Boss, Elementalist Yennecar the Elemental Summoner. This boss has a total of 5 phases. Takes quite long, so make sure you check your consumables and equipment durability before starting the boss battle. Phase 1, Gathering your subjugation force. Achievement conditions. Please gather these characters at the student square. The Princess of Benevolence Peenia. The Spear from Nature's Eggs. The Golden Daughter Lortel. Companion Ayla. Nosy Elvira. Gloomy Clevius. For additional achievements, also gather. Romantic Adele. Lazy Lucy. Senior Maid Belle. Appearing Enemies. Spirit Stigma X 120. Protected Young Fluid Spirits X60. Elemental Traces X60. Low-ranking Fire Spirit Gouda X1. Low-ranking Ice Spirit Elkira X1. Low-ranking Wind Spirit Norden X1. Low-ranking Earth Spirit Peak X1. Low-ranking Light Spirit Rocky X1. Approaching the outskirts of the academic district caged in by a magic seal will result in instant death. Don't go near the outskirts. The most efficient path to follow is in this order: Olin Square, Obel Hall, Teneth Magic Supplies Storage, Western Archery Center, Nailton Training Center, Student Square. You don't have to defeat all the spirits roaming around. But defeating the Fire Spirit Gouda and the Light Spirit Rocky will make moving around easier, so defeat them first. Meeting the additional achievement conditions only give a little bit of likability for each character. The characters will not participate in the subjugation. But try to meet Romantic Adele, since she gives a useful buff for attacking the boss later on. If you're trying to 100% clear the stage, Adele can be found playing ukulele in the grass behind the Western Archery Center, Lucy can be found taking a nap on the roof of Obel Hall, and Belle can be found next to a statue in Olin Square. If you intend on investing in your alchemy or spiritual skills in the future, it will be beneficial to improve your spirit understanding and spirit resonance during this phase. Phase 2, Operation Reclaim the Student Center. Achievement condition. Find the location of Elementalist Yennecar. Appearing enemies. Spirit Stigma X30. Elemental Traces X30. Mid-ranking Wind Spirit Pesci X1. Mid-ranking Fire Spirit Olgoas X1. Spiritual Beast Altair X1. Elementalist Yennecar is located in Nail Hall. But don't enter Nail Hall first. If you choose, enter Nail Hall first, as proposed by the Golden Daughter Lortel, you'll get a bad ending, so please take caution. Mid-ranking spirits can't be damaged by same elemental attacks. If you want, just wait until your subjugation force takes down the mid-ranking spirits. Entering Haze Hall first will give you the Wind Spirit Pesci. Entering Glock Hall first gives you Fire Spirit Olgoas. So please choose which building to enter while considering your elemental skills. There's a trick you can do using straight slash when you attack Altair at the entrance of Nail Hall. Please refer to the original article for more information. Phase 3, the battle at Nail Hall's corridor. Achievement condition. Get to the combat practice field where Elementalist Yennecar is waiting. Appearing enemies. High-ranking Fire Spirit Token X1. The entrance will be different depending on what you chose after defeating Altair. The turning point will pass by quickly, so make sure to pay attention. The key to defeating Token is to continuously damage its tail using your Elemental Slash, which you should have learned from Act 1 Chapter 9. After you cut off the tail using Elemental Slash, use it again to attack the head. Avoid getting hit by Token's periodic skills. Ignite and Tail Whip. Bleeding and burn statuses will stack with each repeated hit. There are 3 cutscenes mid-battle where the pillars around the corridor will collapse. You will instantly die if a pillar falls on you, so be sure to watch out for it. Phase 4, Final Phase. Achievement condition. Stop the summoning ceremony of the high-ranking Dark Spirit, Glaskin. Appearing enemies. High-ranking Dark Spirit Glaskin X1. Elementalist Yennecar X1. The 5th phase is just an event cutscene, so this is the real final phase. Proceed with the mindset that you will have to use all your remaining consumables. Immediately attacking Yennecar, who is conducting the summoning ceremony, will reflect the damage back at you due to Dark Curtain. Attacking Velisper first will temporarily remove Dark Curtain, which will allow Yennecar to take damage. But be careful of her counterattack magic. If the benevolent Princess Peenia dies, you will get a bad ending, so make sure to keep track of her health. If the Princess of Benevolence Peenia, who is building the defense, dies, a bad ending is unavoidable. Make sure to keep track of her health. If you met with Romantic Adele in Phase 1, then you should be immune to Velisper's blood curse. But still, be careful because not all the members of your subjugation force are immune. Phase 5, Glaskin Subjugation. Achievement condition. Defeat the highest-ranking Dark Spirit Glaskin's right hand. Appearing enemies. Highest-ranking Dark Spirit Glaskin's right hand X1. This is just an event cutscene. All you have to do is watch it. Swordsmaster's skill will be added to your skills tab afterward. Make sure to train this whenever you have the time, because increasing this skill's proficiency gives generous bonus stat rewards. Other notes. You need to defeat Yennecar Polarover before dawn or you will trigger a bad ending. Intact Glaskin will be summoned. So make sure to work quickly. This is the end of this guide. It seemed there were many beginners who rage quit cause they can't complete Act 1. I already selected the important information and summarized everything, so please make sure to check the whole guide before entering the final stage. Good luck. I heard an owl's cry somewhere in the dark forest. The cicadas buzzed along in harmony with the occasional sound of the leaves shaking in the wind. I realized that even the forest had its own charm in the middle of the night. I looked up at the countless stars that filled the sky like sand on a beach and had a sentimental thought strike me. I couldn't help but wonder how trivial the struggles I went through were from the perspective of this vast universe. It was such a useless though. But then another thought came to mind. There were no guarantee things would progress exactly as they did in the official timeline. That extremely obvious fact was so abrupt that I couldn't help but smile. I had already adjusted to this lifestyle. But I shouldn't completely lose my sense of urgency. I made up my mind and threw the poker into the campfire. It was time to end the day. I stretched my body before quietly laying down in my shelter. I hoped tomorrow would be another peaceful day. Chapter 22, Glaskin Subjugation Expedition 2. An unexpected incident happened after 2 nights. I lived my days the same as every day. I went to the academic district in the morning and would come back to my camp afterward. I would have usually already left the academic district by dinner time, but I somehow ended up staying quite late today. I set a goal to have a safer living environment for myself, and to do that, I was going to build a proper wood cabin. The library was a great resource to learn the basic design of how to build one. It also had information on the necessary materials and how to properly cut down the trees to use. I didn't really need to worry about food anymore, and there wasn't anything that needed my urgent attention or couldn't be put off until the weekend, like homework. So I thought it should be fine if I stayed late in the academic district today. Nothing good ever came out of getting lazy after already deciding to work on it. I should use this time to collect information to build my cabin. Since I was so used to living life by the hour, it only made sense that I did everything I needed to do at the library all out once while I was already here. After all, the northern forest and the library were so far away from each other that it wasn't efficient to take frequent trips to and fro. The library also had a limit to how many books a student could check out, and I had already exceeded that limit for my academic studies. So since I was already here anyway, might as well get all the reading I could. It was around the time that I was passionately focused on reading for my cabin and had books piling up around me that I heard someone. "It's already closing time. You have been studying quite hard." Another student approached me. She gave off a warm impression and was modest in appearance. I looked around and saw that I was the only one left. It seemed that time had passed by quickly while I was focused on my research. I hadn't even eaten dinner yet, but now it was already time for the library to close down. I looked at the student who approached me and saw she had a blue badge on her chest. This meant she was a first year and I could speak casually to her. "Oh, I'm sorry." It had already grown dark outside the window. I looked at the books piled up like a mountain beside me. The librarian would have a hard time organizing all of these right before closing time. I would have cleaned up in advance if I had known earlier. "No, it's okay. You were totally focused, so I actually felt sorry having to bother you." She had light pink curly hair. I couldn't seem to remember her well, and yet I had this strange feeling that I had seen her before. Oh, she was an apprentice librarian at Sylvania's student library. What was her name? Mocha, Elka, Delka. What was it? At the very least, she wasn't a main character in the story. Even though I know I should study, all I had been doing was sitting around eating snacks and gaining weight. Oh my. I overshared, didn't I? What am I saying? I answered her half-heartedly as I closed the book. I planned to construct the base by the end of the day, but I don't think that was still feasible. Even still, seeing an upperclassman like you motivates me to study harder. You don't come here often, but every time you do, you are always focused and so immersed in your reading that I can't help but respect you so much for it. She smiled. My name is Elka Islan. It seemed she had been wanting to talk to me for quite some time now, considering how the flow of the conversation so naturally lead to an introduction. Ed. Quote. This reaction of them freezing up after they heard my name had become all too familiar now, and honestly, had rather become boring. Though it had been a while since the entrance exam, rumors about Ed Roth's tailor never stopped. I had tried to stay on the down low as much as possible, kept to myself, and studied quietly, doing what I needed to do. But it seemed my reputation hadn't gotten any better. Just how arrogant and hateable was this guy? I mean, in the first place, rumors never seem to flow in a positive direction, but they always tend to flow smoothly like oil in a negative direction instead. I was not so naive to be upset and offended by every single rumor, but I couldn't help but let out a sigh each time I get the occasional reaction like this. This might be a bit rude, but nevertheless, if I lived as quietly as I could, just doing what I had to do, all while diligently studying every day and striving to survive day by day, there would come a time when people's perception may change completely. You're very different from the rumors. The rumors. No, I hope you don't think it's weird, but it was quite rude of her to be bringing up rumors. I should just go and quickly head back to camp. It was already pretty late. But she kept going on. I usually spend my time here at the library after school since I'm an apprentice librarian. And every few days, you would borrow elemental studies books, right? Quote. Quote. You read and return dozens of books with hundreds of pages each in just a few days, and you read 5 or 6 books all in just one sitting. Seeing things like that makes me wonder if the rumors about you being arrogant while not knowing anything were actually lies. Sorry if I offended you. She suddenly hesitated to talk and quickly picked up the books. Anyways, I should clean this up quickly and head back to the dormitory. Have a safe trip back. She talked in a hurry and rank away, right into a bookshelf. Then, out of nowhere, the bookshelves began to fall down like dominoes. Living life outside of the main story could be quite exhausting. I couldn't help but feel helpless, put in a position where I had no choice but to accept the always changing situations. Yonk. I pulled out the struggling librarian trapped under the bookshelves and put her on top of a table. It had been 15 minutes since a thunderous sound reverberated throughout the academic district, and a great tremor struck the entire student library. Justifiably similar to an earthquake, the aftermath was just as enormous. The bookshelves had fallen all over, as did the books which had rolled over on the floor. The reading materials and even the consumables had become a mess. Even the expensive magic tools had smashed into pieces, and the crystal orb, which acted as a light source, as well as all the candles, had gone out, rendering the library completely dark inside. Hey, EGH. She seemed to have fainted, only mumbling out randomly. I thought about it for a while. I couldn't remember her clearly, but I had this weird feeling that I had seen her somewhere before. Considering I had played the game multiple times, I couldn't remember her, then she probably wasn't anyone important. It was probably already past 9 o'clock, and there was no source of light left inside. However, I spotted a sort of soft purple coming from inside the reading room. My eyes hadn't fully adjusted in the dark yet, but I was still able to roughly see it. After looking at it some more, I was surprised to realize it was actually coming from out the window. I went over and opened it. The student library was located on a small hill on the outskirts of the academic district, allowing me to see an entire view of the whole place. There was a reddish pillar of light coming from the student center. It crossed over the sky above the academic district, triggering a spatial seal barrier that circled around the whole area. The earthquake was surely the aftermath of casting such large-scale spatial sealing magic. And the fact that it was coming from the student center made it clear. Isn't this a bit early? Either way, there was nothing to be flustered about. Although I had been suffering from all sorts of hardships in Ed Rothstaller's pathetic body, at least I had the advantage of knowing the information I knew. I scratched my chin as I thought about it. I didn't know if this was something I should be worried about, but there were still quite a few things I didn't quite understand. The first of which is the spatial sealing magic activated by the high-ranking dark spirit Velisper through Yennecar. Velisper used the high-ranking dark magic shadow curtain to block off the entirety of the academic district from the outside. It was an impressive barrier, but it was just a plot device to set the stage. This was the Glaskin subjugation chapter. It was the episode that marked the finale of Act 1 and brought out all the all-star first-year students to join together and form a subjugation squad to attack the student center. But if you were to use your common sense, you would realize that this shouldn't have been possible. Glaskin was the most infamous high-ranking dark spirit among the elemental spirits. This shouldn't have been an issue solved by mere students. If the student center had been taken over, it should have been the faculty members and professors who would have obviously come to defeat it. That was why it didn't make any sense. In order to create an episode where Taylor could manifest the Swordmaster's skill, the developers made it necessary to block the faculty and professors from intervening. Hence Velisper's spatial sealing magic. It was a barrier that locked everything from the inside. This made it easy to realize the space was locked from the inside, but it made it hard for those on the outside. And even if those from the outside were to recognize the barrier, it would still take them almost half a day to destroy the dark magic barrier using standard methods. The only way to quickly break through would be to use overwhelming destructive power. But using such an ignorant method would seem impossible. Although, as this was Solvenia, there were a few people who should be capable of doing such a feat. No need to look that far since Headmaster Obel would be able to destroy the entire barrier without even needing to examine it first. But the high-ranking Dark Spirit Velisper was cunning. This event happened late in the evening when most professors have already returned to their private labs or homes. It was already 9 o'clock, which meant only a few professors would have been remaining in the academic district as the professors' private labs were grouped around their living quarters for convenience. Either way, the Act 1 finale was a battle against time. The goal was to defeat Yennecar before she could summon the highest-ranking dark spirit Glaskin before sunrise. Even though it would be destroyed anyway if left alone, it still delayed time enough for Glaskin's summoning to complete. I looked out the window and stuck my head out. It didn't seem like the spirits Yennecar had manifested were occupying the streets yet. I guess we haven't entered the first phase yet. The flow of this act's boss battle was as follows. Gathering a subjugation force. Operation Reclaim the Student Center. The battle at Nail Hall's corridor. Final phase. Glaskin subjugation. This would start now and would end before dawn. Simply put, this was going to be extremely difficult. I couldn't help but pray for Taily. I had to run around like crazy during phase 1. I felt like a real idiot. Running all over the academic district trying to find all the scattered aces of the first years to bring them all into one place, all while having to subdue all the spirits on the streets. He should have met up with Ayla by now. I was sure he'd have figured out the solution by now. Taily's childhood friend Ayla was well versed in spiritual studies. And with all that spiritual energy flowing around the student center, she would have already told Taily what was going on. The students needed to start working together from now on to defeat that monster of a dark spirit Velisper. Because the moment Glaskin gets summoned, the damage to the whole academic district would be indescribable. That's why gathering all the people who would help at the student square was needed. The soft purple I could see outside the window soon changed into an ominous dark red. The chanting to summon Glaskin must have already begun. And it was clear who was doing it. The cute elementalist star student who was admired and loved by all the second years, that's who. Looking at it from here, it's quite the scene. Taily should already be right next to the student center the moment the barrier magic was cast. The barrier's mana flow exploded, creating a reddish curtain covering the starless sky. I was large enough to cover the entire academic district. It could obviously be assumed that a large-scale event had begun just from seeing the barrier. Be it Glaskin or something else, I was sure Taily would figure it out and solve it. Even if I just spend my time here sitting around reading books, this whole thing would eventually end. There was no reason for me to go out there and suffer. It would be better if I spent my energy and efforts on building my cabin instead. Getting unnecessarily involved could only get me hurt or suffer one way or another. Plus I didn't want to go where all the important characters in the story should be gathered by now. My biggest weapons were knowing the future and having inside information. Getting myself involved and creating an unknown variable would be like stupidly giving up my powerful weapons. Wait, however, a thought suddenly occurred to me. Isn't this the time for that thing? I sat on top of the library table looking at the imposing barrier. I remembered something from a strategy article one read a long time ago. If you intend on investing in your alchemy or spiritual skills in the future, it will be beneficial to improve your spirit understanding and spirit resonance during this phase. That's right. The final stage of Act 1 was where dozens of spirits that signed a contract with Yennecar would manifest and show up. There would also be a large number of fluid spirits. It was an opportunity to improve my proficiency in both the annoying spirit understanding and spirit resonance at the same time. Spirit-type skill proficiency could only be accumulated through contact with a spirit. Whether it be through communication or contact, there needed to be an exchange with the spirit to increase one's proficiency. Combat experiences were great for filling up this proficiency. The problem was that ordinary people couldn't even see a spirit, that was unless they were lucky enough to be born with a tremendous amount of spirit resonance like Yennecar. The only way for ordinary people to come in contact with a spirit was with those manifested by an elementalist. Spirit-related skills had such an exclusive requirement that acted like a difficult barrier. But the chance to easily overcome that difficult barrier is here, in the final chapter of Act 1. Because Yennecar was an elementalist who manifested many spirits during this stage, this was somewhere you could accumulate a lot of combat experience through defeating them. It would be foolish of me to just sit around while an event as generous as a pot of gold was handing out experience points right around the corner. In addition, this would be an actual battle. The amount of experience I would get was gonna be very different from the type one would gain from mock battles throughout the school curriculum. My top priority right now should be to defeat as many spirits as possible and focus on my own growth. I shouldn't have been spacing out. I quickly jumped off the table and opened the door, ready to leave, when the apprentice librarian laying on the table caught my eye. I didn't think there would be any danger of being inside the library building, but just in case, I picked up a piece of parchment and quill that I saw scattered about. Don't panic when you wake up. And stay right here. Everything should be over before daybreak, so you should stay calm and block the entrance. And don't provoke the spirits. Always think about your own safety first and don't hastily move about. It didn't feel right just leaving one note behind. It was unlikely for a wandering spirit to invade the library's reading room and suddenly start attacking a sleeping girl, but there was still a possibility. If she were to get unnecessarily hurt or her life gets ruined, living with the guilt would leave a bitter taste in my mouth. I picked up a blackboard that fell over in the corner and grabbed a piece of chalk that was laying around. Then I wrote the same thing again, only in large letters. Just in case she missed my note on the paper. I covered all the windows before leaving, making it less dangerous since the spirits wouldn't be able to see inside. I also took a blackout curtain laying around and roughly covered the exit as it looked to be too wide open. Doing this, I hoped the entrance could be hidden and escape would be possible if she needed to. Covering everything made it a little bit darker inside. But since I wrote my note on the board, she should still be able to see it. It should be fine now. I hurriedly ran towards the hallway. There would be an event to gain lots of experience starting soon. I needed to move quickly. I should be able to easily handle fluid spirits, even elemental traces. I should even be able to defeat a low-ranking spirit if I really tried. As the player, I had to prioritize how to defeat that monster Velisper over my own growth. But now, thankfully, there was someone who could take that responsibility and handle all the hardships and adversities for me. Taylor. He could just figure it out and take care of it. It would probably be a lot of work. Well, good luck to him. No matter what type of burden I may carry, it shouldn't be any heavier than the weight the princess carries. While it's definitely necessary to pay attention to politics and social problems, why don't you try putting your mind at ease? This isn't a place where the royal family needs to establish authority over everything, it's just Sylvania Academy. Ed Rothstaller's words suddenly came to mind. Though she could easily see into the hearts of others, very rarely had she had the experience of someone else taking a look into hers. This was why she couldn't easily forget it. His blunt matter-of-fact words that he indifferently told the princess. She thought she still had a long way to go. But she once again set her mind straight. This is the situation right now. A first year named Ayla completely summarized the situation to them. Their temporary meeting place was the student square at 11:30 p.m. This meant it had already been nearly 2 hours since the catastrophe had occurred. The square was packed with students who were trapped by Velisper's barrier. They collected all sorts of junk lying around and created a barricade around the fountain in the middle, blocking the entrance from the north, south, east, and west. Although crude, it provided them cover, at the very least, and blocked the spirits scattered about from coming in. There was no way this massive barrier would last this long. It'll be discovered quickly and help will come from the outside. Once they notice it, the professors will surely come to help. The crowd nodded their heads at Ayla's words. Princess Peenia became the head of their temporary base, as voluntarily decided amongst the students. The most important thing in a crisis like this was a person who could take charge and control the situation. A person with legitimate authority and power who could control such a chaotic situation. Needless to say, Princess Peenia was the best person for the role in their current situation. No one could question her authority. There were a total of 57 students gathered in the student square. This was largely attributed to Taylor McClure, a freshman in the combat department. He plowed his way through the hordes of spirits occupying the academic district and acted as a messenger so that all the students could gather in one place. The result was more than half of the remaining students in the district were gathered together. The students who could be considered the core of the group were having a meeting at the center of the camp. These were the benevolent Princess Peenia, the golden daughter Lortel, the spear from nature's eggs, head escort Claire, failed swordmaster Taily, companion Ayla, nosy Elvira, gloomy Clevius. They were freely discussing the countermeasures they could take as they sat on the floor, while others leaned against the barricade or modestly stood around. All the while, Princess Peenia was at the center of it all. Just like I said a while ago, I believe we should enter the student center even if it was just us. That was Taily, who was covered in wounds due to making his way through hordes of spirits to gather everyone. He was standing up with that body full of small cuts and wounds, clearly stating his stance. We shouldn't wait for outside support. That barrier was purposefully made to stall help. There may be a large number of casualties if Glaskin gets summoned, as Ayla said. Coming from Ayla, who was well versed in spirit-type magic, and Taily, who ran around the whole scene, this information was shocking. The spiritual skill covering the night sky was magic used to summon the highest dark spirit Glaskin. There were only a few students in Sylvania with a good enough spirit resonance to be able to summon a spirit like that. Using the process of elimination, the culprit was probably the second-year star student Yennecar Polarover. Princess Peenia, I disagree with this plan. The most important thing here is the princess's safety. To act conservatively, the princess shouldn't be allowed to leave this base. Of course, head escort Claire only thought about Princess Peenia's safety. People outside the barrier will notice soon enough. It should be resolved quickly once the Imperial Guard station and the professors take action. A barrier cast by a high-ranking dark spirit cannot be easily removed unless broken by force. And to be honest, I'm not sure if they will make it in time. I'm not sure if Headmaster Obel will personally come, since you know he tends to be away often. Claire's words were rebutted by the alchemy department's first-year star student, nosy Elvira. She was an alchemist who had a tomboy appearance. Hemtilda, I agree with Taily. Above all, if all the students of this quality were to work together, while it might be too much to take down Glaskin, don't you think we would be able to at least defeat a high-ranking dark spirit like Velisper? Hemtilda, honestly, do you guys not have the confidence at all? So, you want us to break through, over there? Eek, nope. A male student with dark circles around his eyes called Gloomy Clevius pointed towards the student center. The fluid spirits and low-ranking spirits scattered about the academic district weren't that dangerous. If all the students here stuck together, then it should be 100% safe. But the situation at the student center was completely different. That was where the owner of all these spirits was located, Yennecar Polarover. There should be 2 or 3 times the amount of all sorts of mid-ranking spirits and even a spiritual beast standing guard. You want us to push through all the mid-ranking spirits, defeat them, enter the building and then stop Yennecar. Is that even possible? That probably isn't even everything. There are also 2 high-ranking spirits inside. The high-ranking fire spirit Taken and the high-ranking dark spirit Velisper. Everyone fell silent at Clevius's words. They had all seen the power of a high-ranking spirit during the joint combat practice class. Taken was a giant fire lizard that wrapped around the top of Nail Hull and let out a roar. Even Lortel, who was one of the students Professor Glast recognized and assigned to Class A, was completely overpowered without being able to put up a fight. What's even worse was that this Taken was more powerful than before, since all the spirits in the area were affected by Velisper's berserk magic. And Taken was no exception to that. I won't commit suicide like that. I won't. Please calm down, Clevius. I'm sorry, Princess Peenia. Clevius bowed his head at Princess Peenia's words. However, the words Clevius said had already affected the morale of the students around, making them feel despair. The 57 students in their small camp were wary of the situation. Their conversation could be heard by everyone, and she couldn't have anyone continue making such discouraging comments in this situation. Even if she is the top student among the second years, isn't she a bit too strong? She already manifested this many spirits, can she even still summon Glaskin? Ayla was the one to answer Lortel's question. Most of the power actually comes from Velisper. Yennecar is just a medium to express that power. That's why all elementalists make sure to always have a clear mind so as not to be consumed by a dark spirit. Princess Peenia already knew what Ayla explained. Originally referred to as the natural enemy of an elementalist, a dark spirit had an enormous amount of power but would never follow the will of an elementalist. Rather, they were like demons who ruled over elementalists and made them move according to their will. But nobody knows how Velisper ended up taking control of Yennecar, who is more familiar with spiritual studies more than anyone else. She would definitely have known the dangers of a dark spirit better than anyone else. That's not important right now. The spear from Nature's Eggs, who was sitting in a corner, responded to Ayla. Isn't the important thing to do now is to figure out our course of action? A serious and dignified voice. The boy had long hair coming down just to his neck. He spoke indifferently, yet clearly. And the only person who can decide is Princess Peenia. Silence filled the air once again at Zig's words. More than 50 students turned their eyes toward Princess Peenia. Meanwhile, head escort Claire's worried gaze stung the princess's back. She understood that the most important thing for Claire was her safety. However, sitting around and waiting for help wasn't the princess's style. Let's enter the student center. If, by chance, we encounter anything different from what we expected, we will retreat. The students had a divided response. Head escort Claire and Gloom Clevius, as well as the students who had a more conservative view, let out a heavy sigh. While the more proactive students let out a smile. However, there is no need for all the students to enter. Rushing in together will only increase the number of injuries. The right thing to do is to only enter with the people who are capable of taking care of themselves. A regular student would get swept away by a mid-ranking spirit, let alone a high-ranking spirit. There was no reason to take everyone. Everyone here, including my head escort Claire, the top students from each grade and department, as well as the Class A students, will all go. That's because your skills have already been verified. Then that means there is no reason for the princess to go. No, I will also be accompanying them. Claire's face instantly became serious, like a flash of lightning. But Princess Peenia shook her head. It would be absurd not to go to the front lines when I am the one giving orders. Princess, your body is not just your property. As a member of the Royal Knights, I have no choice but to stop you. Don't worry Claire, I haven't been neglecting my magic training. Also, Talie and Ayla, please accompany us as well. The two of you have walked around the outskirts of the student center while trying to search for students, so you probably somewhat already know the internal situation. And with that, the subjugation team members were decided. Sadly, none of the upperclassmen students were there. Except for Claire, who was an adult, everyone else was a first year. However, each member of the team was a powerful student. The first years had an unusual amount of strong students in the first place. Even though it was unfortunate that Lazy Lucy was nowhere to be found, even the upperclassmen wouldn't have been much better than this lineup they already had. We will enter in an hour. Everyone, please finish your preparations. And also, prepare your heart. Everyone nodded their heads at the princess's words. Princess Peenia. A student came running in, breaking the solemn atmosphere. We've identified the remaining people in the academic district. A male student with reddish-brown hair came through the barricade and stood right in front of the princess. Identifying the number of people in a crisis was the most important thing to do. Time was crucial. The number of people trapped by the barrier in the academic district wasn't high since it happened when most people were already heading back to their living quarters. Thanks to this, they could somewhat estimate the overall number of people left by gathering information from the students with them. The male student who was in charge of investigating took in a big gulp of air as he began to report. There were alchemy students at the Teneth Magic Supplies storage. They were researching chemicals and started a sit-in of their own. There shouldn't be any reason for worry since they were mostly third-year students. What else? The faculty and staff who were in charge of locking the doors for the night, along with the building management, are gathered at Audrey Hall. However, as they are general staff, they don't have the means to deal with the spirits. Do they need support? I heard Professor Callie is in charge of that. However, it seems it would be difficult for them to join us. Although most of the professors would have already returned to their living quarters, it seemed that there was still a professor or two remaining. However, it would be difficult to take care of and manage all the general staff. The distance between where we're and Audrey Hall was also quite far, so gathering those workers and having them move all the way here would be expecting a bit too much. However, they couldn't just be left unattended. They have also decided to do a sit-in. Yes, that is the best way to minimize damage. I shouldn't make a decision that would risk the safety of the administration and the teaching staff. I think we're the only ones who are capable of entering the student center. The princess made up her mind once again. The place they were at was right in front of the center anyway. More than anything else, they were the ones who could quickly deal with the situation. Other than that, there was no other recognized stud. There is. A girl raised her voice somewhere around the barricade. Everyone's eyes instantly went to her. A freshman girl was anxiously clenching her fist tightly, arms wrapped around her chest. With closed eyes, she shouted, I'm sorry. The atmosphere was too solemn, so I wasn't able to say anything. Please explain in detail. I am an apprentice librarian in charge of managing the student library. I'm Teisuka. Actually, I still have a friend left behind at the student library. The girl's twisted face looked like she was in pain. It seemed she was struggling to confess. We usually close the library together, but there was someone in the reading room today and he wasn't leaving right until closing time. My friend said she would wait and close up the library herself, so she let me head back first. I was on my way home when. Then that means there is one apprentice librarian and one student in the reading room who are still isolated. Wait, did you say librarian? Zig stood up from his seat in the corner. He then approached the girl who was struggling to speak and looked her straight in the eyes before asking. Your librarian friend. What's her name? Elka Islan. The girl was sweating as she struggled to say her friend's name, trying to avoid Zig's gaze. Zig's eyes began to tremble as soon as he had confirmed the name. Did you say, Elka? Are you sure? You're sure you're not mistaken? Yes, we are learning how to manage magic books as apprentice librarians in class. Zig's clenched fist hit the barricade behind the girl. The girl was caught by surprise and closed her eyes, taking a step back. The barricade behind her made of wooden benches and various decorative objects had collapsed. Shit. Princess Peenia, I'm going to go look for her now. Ziggs. Elka is really good at managing magic books and researching magic, but she doesn't have the power to defend herself. She was just an aspiring scholar. If we leave her alone, she'll definitely be attacked by the spirits running rampant. Ziggs walked back to the center of the camp and dropped to his knees in front of Princess Peenia. I need to go to the student library and look for her right now. Ziggs Eifelstein, do you know that your words are filled with too much emotion? But the one who responded was someone else, the golden daughter Lortel. Going from here to the library is going to take you too long, even if you run at full speed. You would also need to somehow pass through all those spirits. Who knows how long that would take? Rather than that, we need to prioritize stopping Yennecar right now. She's the cause of all of this, after all. A calm and assertive tone. A realistic plan. Polite and calm when talking to superiors, but relentless to those she considered as equals or lower. This was only natural for Lortel, who grew up in the cold, harsh reality of the Elt Company. I know you have some sort of attachment to Elka, Ziggs. But what we need right now is to figure out how this could work. Elka Islan. The spear from nature. Ziggs thought of her as his savior when he was near the end of the cliff. Elka supported and embraced Ziggs despite his lineage as part of the northern nomadic people. People who had walked a bloody path all their lives. Ziggs believed he could no longer live a normal life, but Elka showed him what human warmth was. He remembered seeing her smile between the gaps of the thick magic books in the library's reading room. Because of her, Ziggs was able to leave his life as a bloodthirsty monster behind. For Ziggs, losing the smile of the girl who gave him a chance at a new life was more frightening than losing his own life. But at the same time, Lortel's words were irresistibly persuasive in that they were both rational and realistic. Lortel's words were always justified despite her being a sneaky and greedy merchant. That's just the type of person Lortel was. Please calm down, Ziggs. Being this emotional isn't like you. Lortel had a point. Ziggs had always been the calmest student among the 3 Class A appointees. Lucy was a weirdo while Lortel was always acting suspicious and was someone who couldn't be trusted. But unlike the two of them, Ziggs was always righteous and had common sense. He was also someone who communicated well. Ziggs' calm demeanor actually earned him the catchphrase, "In Ziggs, we trust." But that Ziggs and this Ziggs were vastly different. You didn't need Princess Pinia's insightful eyes to know how important Elka was to Ziggs. Teisuke said there is still one other student in the library with her. Why don't you try trusting that student right now? That's, In front of them was the student center where the root of the problem was. It would be selfish to ignore that and run to the library. Ziggs knew that. That was why he couldn't refute the princess's words. Are you certain that there was another student with her, Teisuke? That is. Teisuke took a step back as sweat rolled down her face, avoiding eye contact with anyone. A sense of anxiety washed over the princess. Is there something you're trying to hide, Teisuke? That's, egg. Paying no mind that he was in front of the princess, Ziggs kicked his chair and stood up once again. He quickly stomped over to Teisuke and grabbed her by her collar. Say it right now. I'm sorry. Teisuke fell to her knees with tears in her eyes as she confessed. It was, Ed Roth's tailor. An ominous silence enveloped the group at the mention of the name. He was just sitting there until late at night. And I didn't want to talk to him because he was so annoying. You know what I'm talking about. What kind of person Ed Roth's tailor is. So I just left Elka to take care of everything. Elka, she isn't the type to care about rumors. And she didn't even know that student was Ed Roth's tailor, so I thought it should be okay. The heavy feeling of guilt pushed her into a corner. The fact that she had taken advantage of her own friend was too heavy to bear. So Elka let me leave early without making a fuss, that's what happened. I'm so sorry. The string of patience Ziggs was hanging on to finally snapped. Ed Roth's tailor. Ziggs was also taking the entrance exam when Ed came and caused a commotion. Ziggs had seen well enough just how ugly of a human being Ed was. Let go of me. Don't you know who I am? I am Ed Roth's tailor, the second son of the Roth's tailor family. Get your dirty hands off me, you pigs. Just where are you touching me? You think I would stoop so low just to mess with a nobody failure like Taily? Let go of me, these dirty and ignorant commoners. Do you even know what you're talking about? Taily, a low-ranking failure of a student who's all talk. Luxuries and pleasures. Prideful and lazy. Incompetent too. Ed Roth's tailor was a pathetic human being with despicable qualities. He took advantage and threw away his closest friends when an opportunity arose, never caring about the kindness he had received. He was truly selfish in every sense of the word. It was obvious what everyone else at the base was whispering about. Ed Roth's tailor. Doesn't this mean the librarian is in big trouble? There are so many rumors that he's seriously disgusting and pathetic. Doesn't this mean the librarian is alone with such a person? Oh no. It was too dangerous to leave the room with these many berserk spirits occupying the streets, let alone the building. The fact that cruel Ed Roth's tailor and Elka were in such a situation. Nothing good would come out of such a situation. Elka had no power in such an extreme situation, and she may even be taken advantage of by Ed Roth's tailor and thrown away. Or worse, he could even lay a finger on her fragile body. Ziggs had complete confidence he knew the type of person Ed was. The rumors about him also added credibility. The fact that Elka's fate rested in the hands of such a person made Ziggs lose all sense of reasoning. I'm heading to the library right now. His anger has already surpassed his limit. Rather than not, it now felt cold. Ziggs notified them in a soft subdued voice. The one he notified was the benevolent Princess Pinia herself, someone that even Headmaster Obel respected. Ziggs' intentions were clear. He was rejecting a royal order. You're crossing the line, Ziggs Eifelstein. The first person to step up was head escort Claire. But Ziggs didn't care. In Lazy Lucis' absence, no one among them could defeat the spear from nature Ziggs. Even Claire, who was a member of the Royal Guards, couldn't guarantee how many strikes she would be able to withstand. He was considered one of the best magicians amongst the first years alongside Lazy Lucy and the Golden Daughter Lortel, the three of them recognized by Professor Glass solely for their skills. And as he was born among the northern nomads, he had been living his life with human blood on his hands for longer than he had matured. He had always lived a life at the crossroads between life and death. No one could compare to him in terms of practicality. If Lazy Lucy was like a tank or a fighter with how her magic cannot be blocked, then the spear from nature Ziggs was like a well-trained special agent his whole life. There may be a massive difference in terms of pure power and scale between the two of them, but within Ziggs' specialized field, he would be able to fully dominate and demonstrate his power. And his specialized field was dueling with no outside interference. I'll beat anyone who tries to stop me from leaving. I can't let you do that. The Golden Daughter Lortel cast a spell. The moisture in the atmosphere froze in an instant, creating a huge ice spear in the air. It was Ice Spear, the same intermediate magic that destroyed the ceiling of Nail Hall. The two first-year top students from the magic department of Sylvania. Ziggs and Lortel stared at each other. It was a rare scene for anybody to witness. Everyone gathered and watched nervously, swallowing their dry saliva at the sudden extreme turn of events. I'll give you credit, Ziggs. You were the strongest person amongst everyone here in terms of power. If you leave the subjugation, then our chance of success will sharply drop. Which is why, I'm sorry but, you can't leave your position as a member of the team. That's hilarious, Lortel. Do you think I'll cooperate if you try and force me to do so? You have completely lost your mind. I know how much you cherish Elka, but you need to at least distinguish between your public and private life. Look over there. Following Lortel's gaze, everyone could see Glaskin's summoning circle gradually turning a darker shade of red. There was an assortment of spirits occupying the hall as well. And where would you be going to leave that behind? Lortel looked Ziggs straight in the eyes. And she hated the burning passion within them. Passion, hot blood, spirit, loyalty, vigor, strong will. Lortel hated the fact that such words would show up in such an urgent situation. Humans needed to be calm and rational. No matter the predicament or harsh the situation may be, one needs to make the right judgment without being misled by wrong emotions. That was the type of person who would be extremely reliable. It didn't matter how many magic skills you knew, or how powerful you were. If your heart wasn't strong enough, then you couldn't be trusted. This was the first great principle that Lortel learned in business ethics. I wouldn't be able to win over you in a one-on-one battle, Ziggs. But if I gave it my all, you wouldn't be able to walk away unscathed. Ha! Ziggs was superior to Lortel in a duel. But that didn't mean Lortel was an easy opponent. They would be able to exchange even blows at first, but over time, someone would eventually get extremely hurt. It was too much pressure just for Ziggs to push through all the spirits and head to the library. And yet Ziggs shook his head. If that's your opinion, then I have no intention of giving up either. The atmosphere between the two shifted to that of one just before a big fight. The atmosphere where if one so much as steps forward, the fight would begin. What are you two doing? What would happen if we fight amongst ourselves? Princess Peenia had reached her limit and shouted. But Princess Peenia, right now, that Ed Roth's tailor. Ziggs responded. But his forceful words grew rather tame towards the end. With a face of complete desperation, Ziggs spoke in between tears. He was no longer the strong-minded and reliable the spear from nature Ziggs. If something happens to Elka, I won't know how to live anymore. His tone had shifted from anger to sadness, and now desperation. Princess Peenia did not expect this reaction. She would have scolded a furious Ziggs for his actions and taken control of the situation. But this Ziggs had now completely become desperate, so clearly visible with the princess's insightful eyes. His heart was more desperate than a dying man's. Elka was truly like family to him. But Princess Peenia stuttered at his sincere desperation. No sounds came out even though her mouth was open. That guy, Ed Roth's tailor. Princess Peenia, you also know what he's like. Princess Peenia, you also know what he's like. She couldn't nod her head at the words. Because she didn't actually know anything about him. Her thoughts were complicated when it comes to Ed Rothsteiler. Even the most obvious facts about him had become a fogged mystery. The clear image she gets when looking into somebody's inner self, and yet she couldn't even manage to figure out the outline of the guy. What was their current situation? They were in an extreme crisis where nothing was guaranteed. A reality where 1 minute, let alone 1 second, was a waste. Glaskin's summoning circle was increasingly growing darker, and the students' safety couldn't be guaranteed. Now everyone was looking amongst each other for decisions. And that decision-maker also became the person in charge. The weight of her title would stay with her for as long as she was alive. But here, it also meant that everyone in the base would follow her. The realization of this uncertain reality made her dizzy, driving her into a corner. Even so, everyone in the camp had their eyes on Princess Peenia and Ziggs. It was an urgent situation that carried responsibility for the princess as everyone awaited her decision. A situation where a mistake in her judgment could lead to the loss of another person's life. A situation where nobody could speak up. And it came back to her. The sound of a burning campfire. The back of a boy who poked the fire with a poker. Looking straight into her eyes without emotion. And those words that penetrated her heart as he left the training center. The distasteful act of crawling on the floor during the entrance examination. His back when he pushed past her to chase after Taylor with an emotionless face. His eyes that never clearly revealed anything. Princess Peenia was completely pushed into a corner, and in that corner she suddenly uttered the words, pointing to the direction of where her sixth sense was leading her. Even so, how about, just once, let's just, believe in that guy. Silence filled the air once again. Everyone stayed silent for a long time. Not a single word was said. The expression on their faces showed how absurd they thought it was. As if the sun would rise from the west. Why? Ziggs lamented. Why do you have to say such a cruel thing? The princess of benevolence that I know, she wouldn't say something so irresponsible. Ziggs only saw her words as a disregard for his worries and opinions. I will, be on my way. Ziggs shook his head as he headed towards the exit. Where are you going, Lortel? Unexpectedly, it was Princess Peenia who stopped Lortel from chasing after Ziggs. Although she was just in the middle of talking about how absurd trusting Ed was. To be honest, she herself didn't understand why she had said that. Just let him go, princess. However, you need to take responsibility for the outcome, Ziggs. There were already too many things to think about. The princess was at her limit. I will pay for all my sins when I get back. Finally getting permission, Ziggs bowed his head politely. He fully understood just how selfish his choice was. Nevertheless, since he had decided to save Elka, then even Princess Peenia couldn't stop him. Ziggs slowly lifted his head and left the base with a stern face. Princess Peenia, watching his back as he slowly walked away, Lortel called out to the princess. She turned her head to find Lortel staring at her in a rather obedient manner. Princess Peenia could tell what Lortel was thinking without having to use her insightful eyes. Being an excessive realist, she would condemn Princess Peenia's decision. Even if somebody were to get hurt or be harmed, she would tell the princess that she should have never let Ziggs leave. The princess steeled her heart. But Lortel actually had a wide smile across her face. Thinking about it, it may have been necessary to respect his opinion. Lortel. It must have been a decision made by the princess after much consideration. Anyways, he's always had a noble will, so he couldn't just blindly judge if something was wrong or right. Lortel spoke so calmly and coolly, as if she didn't care about the tense situation just a moment ago. And she also affirmed the princess's decision. Anyways, if there aren't any changes in our original plan of entering the student center in an hour, we should begin preparing for the subjugation now. I'll be taking a short break and checking my body's condition. Princess Peenia, I hope you two could get some rest. And with an elegant smile, Lortel Kehalan politely greeted Princess Peenia as she walked by. Although the situation didn't go the way she had thought it would go, the way Lortel stepped down and even encouraged the princess's decision was that of a model vassal. However, it was very clear to the princess. Behind her heartfelt smile and act of encouragement was a deep feeling of disillusionment. She felt at the moment Lortel passed her by. Her relationship with Lortel wasn't very good, to begin with, but now she felt that this incident had somehow created a distance that couldn't be narrowed. Even if the world were to turn upside down, Lortel would never believe in Princess Peenia. The princess had a strong feeling about that. "I'll be taking a break too, Claire." She spoke to her loyal escort as she leaned her back against the barricade in a corner. Claire nodded and went on guard with a stern face. And just like that, the tense situation in the camp had ended. They didn't know where Lazy Lucy was, the strongest person amongst them all. One of the most important combat forces, the spear from nature Ziggs, had completely left the base. And the most realistic and rational person, the golden daughter Lortel, was now psychologically and completely hostile towards her. Nevertheless, she was the only one who could manage the weight of these students. The princess hid behind the barricade so nobody would see, and held her knees to her chest. Either way, the atmosphere around the base was not that of taking a rest. It wasn't like a powerful spirit was going to attack them right away. As long as there was someone who kept watch, there was time to check themselves and their equipment. In her corner, where nobody could see, Princess Peenia spoke quietly. It was something that a person of royal status should never say for the entirety of their life. "It's hard for me too." Even though she was afraid that somebody might hear her by chance, she couldn't help but let the words slip from her mouth. "Really, it's hard for me too." She was a girl who had never acted like a child in her life. Though it's sad, even saying those small words were accompanied by guilt. The time to defeat Yennecar was approaching. Looking up to the sky, Glasgon's summoning circle, which was dazzling in the night sky, was drastically getting brighter. Magic skills details. Grade: Ordinary Magician. Specialized Field: Elements. Common Magic. Fast Casting Level 4. Mana Sense Level 5. Fire Element Magic. Ignite Level 10. Wind Element Magic. Wind Blade Level 10. Spirit Type Magic. Spirit Resonance Level 3. Spirit Understanding Level 3. Gasp, gasp. Completely exhausted, I dropped down to the ground, completely exhausted. It had been 2 hours since Phase 1 started. My proficiency in spirit-type skills rose as I captured and defeated spirit stigmatas and elemental traces around the library. I wiped off my sweat and felt a sense of satisfaction rose as I looked at my skills window. This would enable me to imbue spirit magic into my arrows. A breakthrough in terms of my combat power. But seriously, this is way too hard. I had been diligently training, but there were still some dangerous moments because of the wind that kept pushing me away. I looked around. It seemed I had already cleared all the spirits wandering around the library. All that's left were traces of my continuous use of Wind Blade, and the burnt debris laying around from using Ignite. But if I wait a bit, I knew new spirits would eventually come. Phew, I need to get Spirit Resonance as close to level 10 as possible. That way, I can even sign a contract with a spirit. If I don't do it now, there'll never be a better opportunity again. So let's keep working hard. Alright, I couldn't waste this golden opportunity. Phew, not yet. I haven't reached my limit yet. The key to training was pushing yourself to the limit. Wasn't that a known fact to anyone who lifted even just a little bit at the gym? This wasn't the time to be lazy. I needed to keep pushing myself to the extreme until there wasn't a single drop of strength left in my body. Surely, doing that much would bring me a significant stat change. Oh, I saw a bunch of new spirits approaching. I got up, filled with renewed fighting spirit. This wasn't an opportunity that would come by easily. It was time to train and train again until the moment I didn't have an ounce of energy left. I can still do more. I can do it. Chapter 23, Glasgon Subjugation Expedition 3. The phrase, rags to riches, wasn't enough to fully explain the miracle that was Zig's life. The barbaric grasslands up north were a place that the Empire has no rule over. It was a place where one constantly worries about their potential death every day. Ziggs was a descendant of the nomadic people who resided in these lands. By the time he had grown enough, he was already separated from his family. He didn't know when or why he was abandoned, or if he would ever be capable of reintroducing himself back to the company of others. Rather than learning how to read, Ziggs learned how to cut the throat of a deer. Rather than learning how to purchase things from stores, he learned how to procure supplies from roadside corpses. His life was closer to an animal than to a human being. Ziggs, you're like a wolf that walks on 2 feet. Ziggs reflexively nodded his head at Elka's words the first time they met. The reason why she said that was obvious. The first time they met, Ziggs had a filthy appearance as he dragged an elk's corpse behind him, his shaggy hair hanging down his face. Elka was the only one who knew how different his current neat and tidy appearance was from how he was before. But the reason why Ziggs nodded then was not just because of his shabby appearance. Their first meeting was but a distant story now. The civilized world moved much faster than Ziggs had expected, so much so that he could no longer remember what his life in the grasslands was like, back when his every day was the same. When Elka's archaeologist father discovered Ziggs's talent in magic. When they brought him to their mansion. The first time he had a proper meal of warm soup and bread. When he learned the rules of civilization, step by step. When he first used elemental magic to pull out an old tree in the mansion's garden. When he got admitted into Sylvania with Elka. And even the day they walked together to the entrance examination. Even these passing memories of his life were becoming a distant past. However, there were some memories that would come to mind whenever he looked up at the sky. Ziggs, you're like a wolf that walks on 2 feet. He had been living in the vast grasslands. He had eaten the bodies of animals found on the side of the road and had protected himself with the magic he had awakened alone. He had fallen asleep under the moon. He was a baby wolf that had been abandoned by the pack. Ziggs had no choice but to reflexively nod at Elka's words. Thinking back on it, he had lived a very lonely life. The day he first met Elka, Ziggs realized what loneliness was. That was a very old story now. Gasp, gasp, the date had already changed. It wasn't until way past midnight when Ziggs finally arrived at the library. Fluid spirits and low-ranking spirits were no match for Ziggs, but they were constantly rushing towards him, causing his vitality to wear down as he ran and used mana to defeat them at the same time. He would have arrived much later if he fought Lortel. In this situation, when every second and every minute mattered, he felt grateful to Princess Peenia for stopping Lortel. He would have to eventually repay the favor, but paying the price for what he did would have to wait for now. Contrary to what he expected, it was completely quiet around the library. The annoying spirits that ganged up and attacked him all the way here were nowhere to be found. However, he found traces left behind. This is. Analyzing the situation using traces left in the environment was not uncommon for Ziggs, who had a strong sense of survival. There were traces of magic all around the entrance of the library. The cutting marks all over the floor and benches must have come from Wind Blade, and the burnt marks on the empty floor and walls were signs of Ignite. Ziggs calmly looked around. It was quiet around the library like usual. It was like nothing has happened despite the disaster that was taking place at the student center. The library located on a small hill was still completely in place. The traces of fighting started at the entrance of the library all the way to the outskirts of the district. This wasn't a simple defensive battle protecting the base, but a sign showing someone had deliberately beaten all the spirits circling around the area. There were even footprints at the exact same spot several times. They seemed to have secured the safety of the library like a guard. Whoever it was had beaten all the spirits around the library. But it didn't matter who it was who left these traces. Ziggs quickly rushed inside the library to find Elka. Through the large wooden doors was a lobby with an elaborate corridor extending to both sides. And right there in the lobby was a familiar boy, laying with his back against a statue. His name came out of Ziggs's mouth. Ed Roth's Taylor. A boy who was completely exhausted and was resting. A name that made Ziggs lose all reasoning. Ziggs ran to him like a bullet. What? You? Resting against a statue, he rose on one knee supported by an elbow. Ed Roth's Taylor didn't look quite normal. His school uniform was torn and worn out. His body was a wreck, and his vitality had completely depleted. A boy who was completely exhausted and resting. A name that made Ziggs lose all reasoning. He looked like he had been fighting to the extremes. But these were things Ziggs couldn't afford to pay attention to calmly. Elka. Where's Elka? What are you doing here? Tell me where Elka is first. Ed frowned as he looked straight at Ziggs. In any case, he wouldn't be able to communicate with Ziggs right now, as Ziggs had completely lost his mind. Reading Room 3. Ziggs ran to the reading room even before Ed could finish his answer. He had to secure Elka's safety right away. He ran like crazy toward the end of the hallway, where a door labeled Reading Room 3 came into view. But it had an unusual entrance. There were bookcases used as a barricade and a blackout curtain was blocking it from view. Though simple, the reading room looked to be fortified. Ziggs removed the curtains hanging from the door, opening it with such force that it broke the sliding door. Elka. Ziggs entered the room yelling her name. And just as he hoped for, Elka was there, safely laying on a desk. She was unconscious, however. Elka. Are you okay? Elka. Ziggs took a deep breath and observed Elka's conditions. She was breathing peacefully. Looking at her from head to toe, there was not a single scratch, and it didn't seem like she had been attacked by a spirit. It felt as though black mud was persistently pushing down his throat. Ha! Ziggs collapsed into a chair, his whole body exhausted. Elka Islam was safe. That one fact felt like great salvation for the boy. Thank goodness, really, thank God. He wiped his face for a while, Elka sleeping peacefully in front of him. 5 minutes passed by before Ziggs came back to his senses. After his breathing had calmed down, and his vitality had recovered back to some extent, his rational and logical mind began to return. Having confirmed Elka was safe, he was now able to judge the situation objectively. Ziggs looked around the room. The windows were completely covered by large bookshelves. A rampant spirit looking through the window wouldn't have been able to see inside, the view completely blocked. And the blackout curtain hanging on the entrance. Since it was a doorway, it wouldn't have been a good idea to block it with a bookshelf like the windows. In a situation where you would need to run away, a bookshelf would only block your way out. Indeed, the blackout curtains were a good replacement for that. It was a decision that showed a lot of skill and thought. Since there weren't enough blackout curtains, the door at the back was blocked by another bookshelf, and outside it was a simple wall of defense, in case there were spirits in the hallway. It was set up in a way that any other entrance or exit other than the door nearest to Elka would have been dangerous. That's right, Elka. No matter how urgent the situation is, you were always calm and made the right decisions. Of course, it's not like I didn't already know that. It wasn't that he didn't trust Elka, rather, he was so worried he couldn't bear it. However, the more Ziggs thought about it, the more he realized something seemed strange. The reading rooms were barricaded with bookshelves outside. They were so big that even adult men wouldn't have been able to lift them properly. It was hard to believe Elka did everything by herself. She was born weak, enough to even struggle to lift a hand axe. Then the person who did all of these. By the process of elimination, there was only one person who could have done it. That guy. Come to think of it, he didn't realize this at first because he wasn't in his right mind, but Ed Rothstaler was lying in the middle of the lobby, looking completely exhausted. Ziggs heard he was an extremely cruel and selfish person, the biggest piece of trash there was, someone who had no problem backstabbing others. But looking at this situation right now, it was all too strange. The traces of a battle outside, and the simple fortress around the reading room to conceal an unconscious girl. On top of that, Ed's appearance looked like he dealt with all the spirits approaching the library to protect Elka. The endless onslaught of spirits from the student center until here, where a boy was holding his legs together in the lobby, looking worn. It wasn't difficult for Ziggs to figure it all out. But, as someone who lived in the wild, it was obvious to Ziggs what the best course of action would have been in this crisis situation. It may sound cold and heartless, but in a situation such as this, Elka was nothing more than deadweight. If you wanted to keep your own life and secure your own safety, the rational and logical way would have been to abandon Elka, or use her as bait and run away. Humans had no choice but to feel guilty for such acts, but humans in need also had no choice but to worry about their own survival. Ziggs thought that someone like Ed Rothstaler would have no problem doing such things without any sense of guilt. That was why Ziggs lost sense of all reasoning and ran all the way here. That guy, there's no way. Ziggs couldn't help but repeat the words again. Ed Rothstaler's reputation in the academy was already rock bottom. You wouldn't be able to find anyone who approved of him. Ziggs himself had seen that despicable side of his very clearly. There was no way a single slice of selflessness could be in such a person. That was what Ziggs thought. There is no way that there would be even a single piece of selflessness left in such a person. That's what he had thought. Don't panic when you wake up. And stay right here. Everything should be over before daybreak, so you should stay calm and block the entrance. And don't provoke the spirits. Always think about your own safety first and don't hastily move about. Quote. Quote. On the other hand, this was written on the blackboard. Judging by the crooked letters, you could tell this was written in a hurry. Even though he was in a hurry and was most likely busy, he brought a blackboard all the way here and set it up, and then wrote this message. It was easy to figure things out. Ziggs was left with no choice but to sit for a while, staring off into space. Magic skills details. Grade: Ordinary Magician. Specialized field: Elements. Common Magic. Fast Casting Level 5. Mana Sense Level 6. Fire Element Magic. Ignite Level 12. Wind Element Magic. Wind Blade Level 11. Spirit Type Magic. Spirit Resonance Level 7. Spirit Understanding Level 7. What a shame. I couldn't help but let out a sigh as I crouched down in the lobby of the library. My beginner magic had finally broken through the wall that was level 10 after training against the spirits till I reached my limit. Ignite had reached level 12, to the extent that I could now one-shot low-ranking spirits with its fire. It was a good enough foundation to try and start acquiring intermediate magic. I was able to break some ground tonight. Nevertheless, I couldn't help but let out a sigh of regret. Spirit Resonance and Spirit Understanding were both at level 7. Just a little bit more. When the sum of the level of these two skills exceeds 15, the field of spirit-type magic would become available and spirit contract slots would open up. Then you could form a contract with an appropriate spirit in proportion to your intelligence stat, your amount of magic power, and your spirit understanding. My capabilities in combat and production would greatly expand if that were to happen. I would be able to apply various attributes to enchant my arrows using spirit skills. And by raising my production level, I could try and begin crafting basic magic tools with the spirit's protection. With such a hopeful dream, I fought and trained until I was completely out of energy in my entire body. But I was ultimately blocked at the very end of the threshold. I could no longer see any spirits wandering around the academic district. There were no new spirits coming towards the library either. That clearly meant the Glaskin subjugation team had already entered the student center, marking the start of Phase 2. The main stage for the story would now be the student center, where Yennecar was summoning Glaskin. This is too cruel. Even though I caught so many. The two spirit-type skills had been stuck at level 7 for a while. I kept hoping for one more level, just one more. With that in mind, I defeated and depleted all of my magic until my whole body was completely exhausted. But the experience points I needed at that level had already increased significantly, so both their levels had barely risen. I guess this is it, since I've only been catching floof spirits and low-ranking spirits. If I were to catch a mid-ranking spirit instead, I could probably gain a lot of experience points all at once, and maybe even open up a spirit contract slot. But I would need to go to the student center to do that, and I would have to push past all the low-ranking spirits just to get there. It might be possible now with how much their numbers have dwindled since Phase 2 started, but my body was in too bad a shape to even attempt it. And not only that, but all the important characters of the main story would be there. And nothing good would come out of hanging around a place where the all-star cast of the first years was gathered. I had no choice but to just wait for the next chance. Although disappointed, I called it quits and promised myself to do it another time. Main story. After ignoring it for a while, a question came to mind the minute it came up again. What is Ziggs doing here? I let him in since he was in a hurry, but now that I thought about it, Ziggs was a key member of the subjugation team. An ominous feeling dawned on me. At that moment, I realized I needed to reorganize this whole situation. Stomp, stomp. I heard footsteps coming from reading room 3. Sure enough, I looked and Ziggs was slowly making his way down the lobby with Elka on his back. He stopped right in front of me and slowly asked, "What are you doing here?" Quote. I couldn't read any emotion in his voice. It must have been hard for him to completely ignore me when he saw I was resting and wounded. I asked, "What are you doing here?" This was a question I didn't need to lie to answer. Training. Ha. Ziggs laughed for a bit. Ha ha. That's quite some training. I didn't expect him to laugh. Ziggs continued to talk in a less serious voice than I had expected. This is a crisis situation. We don't know what will happen next. There's a barrier all across the sky and spirits won't stop attacking us, and yet you were here training all by yourself. When you should be worrying about your life. And with that, Ziggs stopped smiling. No matter how naive a person is, who would believe that? Quote. Okay, I feel like I'm beginning to understand you a bit as a human being. You're this kind of person in the first place, anyway. A stretch of silence engulfed us. Ziggs looked at me with a serious look on his face, and then after a while, he closed his eyes and got lost in his own thoughts. After standing still for a long time, what Ziggs did next was completely unexpected. With Elka still on his back, Ziggs bowed his head and bent all the way to his waist. I really owe you a great favor, Ed. Ziggs suddenly speaking to him with respect was surprising enough, but the unexpected action made it even more difficult to figure out what would happen next. Till now, Ziggs has been speaking casually to Ed. I will definitely repay this debt when the opportunity arises. It was at this moment that I finally figured out what was going on. That girl Elka on Ziggs's back was definitely his lover, or would be his lover, someone who had been with him since their childhood. I couldn't help but think about it. Ziggs' past was not given much importance in the game. The name Elka was only mentioned in a supplementary book, so it was an unknown name for even the most dedicated of fans. Then hurry and go back to the student center. The words came out on their own. Ziggs, who still has his head down, looked as if he had been stabbed in the lungs. Didn't you abandon the student center and run all the way here to save Elka? Fortunately, he didn't ask me how I knew all of that. Ziggs was in shock and didn't have time to argue about such things. I'm not going to scold you for making such a selfish decision. But now that you've confirmed Elka is safe, you should go and hurry up and do what you have to do. There was no need for me to say much. Ziggs was one of the most talented first-year students in Sylvania. Ziggs' participation would determine the victory or defeat of the subjugation force. There was no need to worry if the main story was progressing the way it should, because if Ziggs was here right now, then the subjugation force itself won't get established in the first place. They may be able to go past Phase 2, but Phase 3 with the high-ranking fire spirit Taken was a different matter. The only way to break through Taken was with Ziggs. The main character Taily would knock off some of Taken's scales, and then cut his tail off using the elemental slash skill. Then Ziggs, who had excellent battle sense and agility, would climb on top of Taken's body and directly inflict magic damage on its torn flesh. Taken would scream in pain from this. Meanwhile, Ziggs would make a hole in its neck, and Taily would jump down from the ceiling to cut it off again. In order for this battle to happen, Ziggs needed to be there. Go and give Taily a hand. Just do whatever he wants. Some way or another, everything will work out just fine. Taily, do you mean Taily McClure? That's right. That guy who barely escapes failing every single day. Although, Taily shouldn't be that weak nowadays, given that it's already the Act 1 finale. I'm sure he'd been training to increase his stats. Plus, he had already gone through various events at this point. He must have already gotten some sort of special skill or abilities. If he had been fostering his skills with optimal efficiency and not wasting an inch, he should be able to use intermediate magic. Although, I didn't think he would have gotten that far by now. I was sure Taily's efforts in raising the level of his skills were not up to my satisfaction. But he should still be trying his best. This episode was when he would receive a Swordmaster skill, which meant that he would be able to take care of things by himself soon enough. Ziggs made a weird face. Ed, don't you hate Taily? Shit. Since Ziggs saw the incident at the entrance exam, he would have definitely felt something was off from my words. This isn't the time to be arguing about what's right and wrong. I waved my hand, dismissing the topic away. Either way, he was still an important character in the main story, so I didn't need to give him more information, nor should I get too close. And I don't see why people value Taily so highly. I never had the chance to talk with him properly yet. It's not over-evaluating him. A particular example would be the high-ranking fire spirit Taken. You won't be able to deal damage to it unless Taili uses elemental slash. It's not about the destructive power, it's about the compatibility of the skills in a given situation. Since it had already come to this, giving this much of a tip should be fine. Listen carefully. Don't go trying to break through Taken's scales with magic. Wait until Taili cuts through the scales with his elemental slash. I don't think there is anyone on the subjugation force with enough pure firepower to break through Taken's scales. So don't go around wasting your magic power trying to. Stay calm and wait for the right moment. The key to this battle was to attack the part of Taken's scale that had been exposed by elemental slash. I didn't really want to give too much away, but I figured I might as well tell him this for insurance. The moment Ziggs appeared at the library, the original timeline had already been messed up anyway. I thought it was only reasonable to take some backup measures such as this. Just in case. ... I'll keep that in mind. Ziggs seemed like he still had a lot of things to say, but he held them in and merely accepted everything I had said. It seemed he may have realized it too. That the summoning circle for Glaskin in the sky kept getting darker and darker. We didn't have much time left. There is a temporary base that the first-year students had built in the student square. I'll escort you there. Forget it. Go by yourself. There's not much time left, so hurry up and get moving. I'm going to just rest here. Ed, you never know when the spirits might come over here again. Phase 1 had already ended. The library should be safe from this point onwards. But Ziggs didn't know that and was worried for me. It's fine, just go. I'll figure this out. ... The most important thing right now is for you to get back to the student center. You know that too. Even though he already knew that, Ziggs had already left everything behind just to come here. My words seemed to have hit a sore spot as a shadow passed over Ziggs's face. Whether you may be feeling guilt or shame, worry about that after all of this, okay? With that, I was able to clearly deliver my message to Ziggs. Ziggs closed his eyes for a second to weigh in the pros and cons before nodding his with a stern expression. He fixed Elka on his back when he very clearly said, "Thank you for the advice." And just like that, Ziggs headed towards the entrance of the library. I let out a sigh as I leaned my back against the statue, watching Ziggs walk away. Ah, what a headache. Anyways, this should be the end of that. As long as Ziggs returned back to the student center before Phase 3, in one way or another, things should work out fine. Hold on a second. All of a sudden, I thought of something that made me feel a weird sense of anxiety envelop my chest. A weird echoing of words was going through my head as I stared at Ziggs' back as he walked away. I remembered the countless times I played Sylvania's failed swords master. I understood the basics, did my best to control the variables, and made sure that there were no harmful influences that would affect the main story. And yet, I still kept feeling the strange claw of anxiety in my chest. I had no idea where it could be from. No, if I really thought about it, it was. And I don't see why people value Taili so highly. I never had the chance to talk with him properly yet. It was because of something Ziggs said. From what I remembered, Ziggs was a supportive character that recognized and helped the main character Taili. Whether it was a crisis or whenever deemed necessary, Ziggs would work together with Taili, thus, creating a closer bond between them. To put it simply, he was a character designated to be the main character's friend. A reliable colleague, or a friend. So it was strange he didn't have much appreciation for Taili. Wasn't Act 1 already about to end? Maybe, there wasn't enough time for them to build a proper bond just yet. But even then, Ziggs was talking about Taili as if he had never even met him before. That was definitely strange. I went through my memory and racked my brain for when Taili and Ziggs became friends for the first time. It was Act 1 Chapter 9, End of Semester Evaluation. It was the first time Ziggs and Taili fought each other in a duel. The story followed their battle and how Ziggs started to recognize Taili, the boy continuing to grow every moment of the battle. But after thinking that far, all kinds of possibilities unfolded in my head. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. "Hey, Ziggs." "Huh." I called to him as he made his way out. I changed my mind. I should go to the student center too. It was a place where all the main characters would be gathering. There was no reason for me to go, originally. But unfortunately, everything had just collapsed. The finale of Act 1, Glasgon's subjugation, was currently underway. However, I didn't know why, but the finale happened last night instead of at the end of the semester. It had moved a whole month forward. There was no way to know why Yennekar's actions had been accelerated so soon, or what type of variables came into play here. I wasn't sure if we would ever find out in future either. But right now, every move Yennekar Polarover would make was like an empty piece of the puzzle. But there was one fact that I became certain of. Because Glasgon's subjugation happened earlier than scheduled, Act 1 Chapter 9, end of semester evaluation, hadn't happened yet. And what did that mean? A phrase from a strategy guide I read a long time suddenly came to mind. Phase 3, the battle at Nail Hall's corridor. Achievement condition. Get to the combat practice field where Elementalist Yennekar is waiting. Appearing enemies. High-ranking fire spirit token X1. The entrance will be different depending on what you chose. After defeating Altair, the turning point will pass by quickly, so make sure to pay attention. The key to defeating Token is to continuously damage its tail using your elemental slash, which you should have learned from Act 1 Chapter 9. After you cut off the tail using elemental slash, use it again to attack the head. At this point in time, when Act 1 Chapter 9 still hadn't happened, Taili didn't have elemental slash just yet. But what this meant was that right now, Taili couldn't beat Token. Needless to say, it meant the collapse of all the major premises of the story. Chapter 24, Glasgon Subjugation Expedition 4. Someday, by all means, please save Yennekar. I suddenly remembered the high-ranking wind spirit Merelda's message. I couldn't help but want to ask follow-up questions at such a request. How did it know what was gonna happen to Yennekar? It probably didn't have information of how the story would progress like I did. And what did it want me to do by asking me to save her? Did it expect me to just run to the student center and defeat Velisper? To go sacrifice myself and throw away my insider information about the future? How did it even think I could defeat Velisper? Or did it want me to read Yennekar's thoughts so I could prevent her from doing this? Like some mad god obsessed with controlling the variables to make it possible for Yennekar to live a happy life. There were certain degrees to how unreasonable demands could be. But Merelda wasn't an idiot. The one who delivered the message was Lucy Mariel. Merelda kept track of every single move I made in the forest. This meant she took that into consideration before giving me the message. There must have been a reason for it. Trying to figure out her intention wasn't easy, nor was it important, right now. I already had so many things I needed to take care of. I didn't have the headspace to even think about some side problem. The world was already filled with difficult challenges, so I found no reason why I should even challenge the impossible. The reason people had a hard time challenging the impossible was that they didn't even know it was impossible in the first place. From the point of view of someone who had already cleared Sylvania's failed swordmaster countless of times, who had measured all the skills of both characters and enemies, who had played through the game in various playstyles, trying to beat Token right now would be challenging the impossible. Sylvania's failed swordmaster, Act 1 finale. The third named boss. The high-ranking fire spirit Token. Token was already a high-ranking spirit with overwhelming specs, but with Velisper's berserk buff, it now had an infinite advantage against magic. The hard scales that wrapped around its entire body nullified the power of any magic attack. The fact that a sword could even penetrate it already didn't make any sense. Anyone who had ever played a game would figure it out at this point. Token wasn't a boss made to be defeated through skills and strategies. He was an event boss. A boss added by the story to have Taili use his newly acquired elemental slash from the last chapter. Whenever a new skill, function, element, or anything else was introduced in a game such as this, the natural progression would be to make players learn how to use it. It would be ridiculous if they just kept adding skills but never introduced the players to how to properly wield them. As a result, this became a situation wherein I had to open a locked door without the key. That was impossible, obviously. What's inside? It's nothing special. It's not necessary, but it's good to have, just in case. Is that so? Ziggs asked me about the leather bag I brought out from the reading room. But there was no time to explain, so I had held the bag in my arms as I crossed the hallway. Since I needed to make the impossible possible, my methods didn't have to be normal. If I couldn't open a locked door, then I just had to go through the back door. The story that was progressing smoothly somehow got derailed. I needed to put my stance of safely watching from the sidelines on hold. I had to flip it back to its original state. I needed to quickly adapt to the unfolding situation. I would have been able to solve this in a simpler way had I had enough time. Since I knew every single factor within the game, I would have been able to plan more accordingly to my benefit. But I could only afford to deal with what I already had. And my method boiled down to my insider information, a privilege I alone enjoyed. Luckily, I came up with a good idea. Though the idea was ridiculous, it was the surest idea that would work out. I'm sorry for being late. I will pay for the crime I had committed. Never mind that. Even if you were here, we would have lost anyway. The time to face the subjugation force came earlier than I had expected. Ziggs dropped Elka off at the student square since he couldn't enter the student center with her on his back. We ran all the way here with all our strength since it was an urgent situation. But surprisingly, the subjugation team had already returned to the square. And their condition was ridiculous. We were lucky enough to retreat, but Princess Peenia looked up at the vast night sky. Glasgon's summoning circle had almost completely turned dark red. It wouldn't even be strange if it were to be completed right now. The barrier covering the academic district was still intact, so it seemed moot to expect help from outside. Having come all the way here, this is a situation where I have to enter headfirst and either sink or swim. Time wasn't on our side. Nobody would suggest waiting for outside help at this point, given how the summoning circle had filled the sky with red. But even if they were running out of time, the subjugation team already lost once and had wasted precious time from retreating. I looked around. How far did they enter? Where did they get stuck? And how much damage did they take? I was awestruck by all the students gathered around me. All of these main characters who had individual roles were gathered together in one place like some sort of glorious event. The failed swordmaster Taili, companion Ayla, the benevolent Princess Peenia, the golden daughter Lortel, the spear from nature Ziggs, head escort Claire, gloomy Clevius, nosy Elvira. They all had injuries of varying severity, big and small. Head escort Claire, particularly, had one of her legs completely burned. She was now useless in terms of fighting power. Not only that, but Clevius was also wearing a split on one of his arms. It looked like a fracture. That meant he too had lost a great deal of value as part of the team's fighting power. But the most important thing was that Taili looked okay. Considering that fact, I started to decide what steps we needed to take to keep the story progressing. Claire voiced her opinion, barely managing to keep her balance. If you're planning on re-entering, I think it would be a good idea to gather volunteers from the regular students and then re-enter. Once the pain goes away, I will also hurry up and... That's enough, Claire. You will rest here. Claire shook her head. Princess Peenia, if you were really being considerate towards me, then please withdraw your command. You can't even walk properly, Claire. I too have a heart. You could infer from the princess's tone that the reason such a talented royal knight such as Claire was even seriously injured was that she had protected Princess Peenia. The princess talked in a firm voice, keeping her resolve, but she must be a wreck inside. It was definitely like her to not show any weakness. However, just being strong-minded didn't mean the current crisis at hand would be solved. It wasn't a strong heart that would solve this crisis, but one's abilities. I looked around our surroundings. Surrounding the square were Nair's Hall, a Bell Hall, and the Student Center. Of the buildings, Glocht Hall was completely destroyed, a result of entering the building to fight a mid-ranking spirit during Phase 2. The entrance to Nail Hall was also open, probably from when they defeated the spiritual beast Altair who was blocking it. Just as I expected. They got through Phase 2 but lost to Taken during Phase 3. Thankfully, they were able to retreat successfully. Although they ended up wasting too much precious time and even lost Claire, who was an important part of the team in terms of fighting power. The top first-year student of the combat department, Clevius, had also lost more than half of his fighting power. We didn't have much time and we were out of fighting power. It also seemed like the summoning circle would get completed anytime now before any sort of outside help could come. I couldn't just stay still, but I also was not sure if we would be able to win if we were to re-enter right away. Princess Peenia tightly clenched her teeth. She was in the position to lead the camp. She had to come up with some type of plan. Let's divide the subjugation team into two. I spoke the minute I was able to properly assess the situation. An outsider had intervened all of a sudden. The gloomy atmosphere due to the first-year aces getting hurt became even worse at my intrusion. Looking at the summoning circle, it seems like it's going to be completed soon. There's not enough time to defeat Taken. What the Ed Roth's tailor? Gloomy Clevius said as he winced in pain from his fracture. Listen here, does this situation seem like a joke to you? Let's hear him out first, Clevius. Zig stopped Clevius before he could finish what he was saying. Everyone's eyes widened at the sight. They looked baffled. Something told me Zig's attitude before he left and his attitude towards me now were vastly different. They must be thinking something happened at the library. But no matter what may have happened, I didn't have time to pay attention to such things right now. Taken relies on its hearing more than its sight when grasping the surrounding terrain and enemy's location. So making a loud noise should be enough to lure him away. It will be better if we have one team distract Taken while the other enters the combat practice field. Ed, you can only say that because you've never fought Taken. It was Lortel who responded. She had fought Taken one-on-one during the joint combat practice class a while ago. It's not the same as when I fought it in class. I know. Velisper must have cast Berserk. Fighting low-ranking spirits was enough for me to realize that. Attract his attention and earn time. That plan doesn't sit well with me. It was already a relief not to fall down or lose your life with each of its attacks. The only reason we were able to retreat was because we got lucky. Lortel calmly explained. Did you escape when the pillar fell down? Quote. How did you know that? They all looked at me with the same questions in their eyes. But there wasn't enough time to explain. I wasn't comfortable intervening in the first place. I wouldn't have needed to explain anything if only there wasn't an unexpected variable that happened. I had decided not to do anything that would ruin the flow of the original story so as not to risk the knowledge I had. But I needed to put that aside for now. There are 3 cutscenes mid-battle where the pillars around the corridor will collapse. You will instantly die if a pillar falls on you, so be sure to watch out for it. It wouldn't have been this hard if we had Elemental Slash. But that was something you'd only know if you had enough experience playing the game. If you led Taken under the large stone pillars found at 3 corners of the corridor, you would be able to time it and had them fall on him, giving the players a bit of time. You were lucky. They were lucky enough to have one of the pillars fall on Taken, giving them enough time to escape. It was like the heavens had truly helped them. Although that would only happen the first time, because Taken would cut the pillar with its tail after, meaning you couldn't bank on such luck twice. I won't press you for the details, but what you're suggesting is completely unrealistic, Ed. Taken was an opponent we couldn't do anything against, even when we all rushed him. So why would we split our fighting power into 2? We may be able to buy a little bit of time, yes. But I don't think that small amount of time would mean anything in the long run. What Lortel said was realistic and reasonable. Her impressive level-headed reasoning was the biggest reason she got to where was today. The half who would be in charge of Taken would most likely get wiped out before they could even buy us some time. And if Taken joins Velisper at the field, that would just be the worst possible situation for us, taking care of the both of them at the same time. To summarize the entire reason for her object, it was, the risk is too high. But that was not something I could say, knowing what I know. The risk posed by an action can only be determined if there is another alternative path, Lortel. Lortel momentarily shut her mount, unable to refute my words. She rolled her eyes, thinking of what else she could argue with, but she couldn't come up with an alternative path to deal with this situation. Princess Peenia, we shouldn't forget the most important goal we have right now. And that's to stop Yennecar, who is currently possessed by Velipser. Everyone fell silent. Nobody wanted to agree with me even though everything I said was true. There's no reason to defeat Taken. We can just run past him and find a way to stop Yennecar in the practice field. With this group of people here, we should be able to defeat Velospur. No, not should. We have to defeat Velospur. With all these main characters gathered here today, if we still couldn't beat Velospur, then it could only be attributed to a lack of synergy. This subjugation team could definitely beat Velospur and Yennecar during the final phase, even if they were lacking in fighting power. The key was Taili's swordmaster skill. Things would work out if enough people supported him during the battle. Ed Roth's Taylor. Princess Peenia was staring right at me, looking worse for wear. So many things and different variables must have pushed her into a corner. The hem of her dress, which had always been shiny, was now dirty and torn here and there. The tips of her silky hair had also been burned by Taken's flames. All traces of a gruesome battle. With her mind and body pushed into a corner, she looked straight at me. It's you again. Since we don't have much time, I won't say much. The students around us began to whisper. Who was he to talk to the princess so condescendingly? Isn't it crazy to follow Ed Rothstaller's plan? Won't we all die at this point? Well, these were things not even worth reacting to. I am not lying, but these students were not the ones who would make the final decision. Only one person in this base had a monarch's qualifications to take on such responsibilities. Princess Peenia stared at me for a while. She seemed to be lost in her thoughts, but soon nodded her head. Whatever your intent may be, you didn't say anything that wasn't true. A judgment made calmly. Princess Peenia, are you taking his side? That guy is Ed Rothstaller. Quiet, Claire. I am not taking Ed Rothstaller's side, I'm just following the reasonable opinion that he had brought up. Princess Peenia told the subjugation team after making her final decision. We can't beat Taken right now. But what's certain is that if we defeat the elementalist Yennecar, then Taken would also be defeated. But there's something we must first decide. Who's going to stop Taken? Ziggs said, followed by a moment of silence from everyone. Isn't that just picking a person who wants to commit suicide? Watch what you say, Elvira. Oh my, I apologize, princess. In a state of disarray, nosy Elvira quickly shut her mouth. One is not specifically safer than the other. The opponent will either be a high-ranking dark spirit or a high-ranking fire spirit. That's right. From their point of view, one was not safer than the other. But from my point of view of knowing everything, dealing with Taken was much more dangerous. Taken was an enemy designed to teach Taili how to use elemental slash. That's why it was an overwhelmingly overpowered enemy. On the other hand, the high-ranking dark spirit Velospur was just a strong enemy. Defeating him would not rely on a specific attack method like Taken. Velospur was just a standard final boss you could defeat through strategy and properly using your abilities. Taken's existence is completely unreasonable, given the circumstances. A lock that needed to be opened without a key. But Velospur was just a complicated labyrinth. And with these many talented members, they could surely defeat him through pure effort. But, I don't want to deal with that fire lizard. The cowardly Clevius groaned. I'll go with the team fighting Velospur. I'd rather go that way. You even said it yourself, that it was more important to deal with Yennecar. That's right. Right now, the biggest difference between the two high-ranking spirits was the fear that the subjugation team had felt. Tension spread throughout the group. The princess wasn't able to stop Clevius from saying such discouraging things. The enemy they hadn't met yet, versus the enemy they already lost against. It was obvious that the fear they felt for Taken was much stronger. Taken, the high-ranking spirit made even stronger by Velospur's berserk buff. The embodiment of fear, who swung its tail around, letting out a mighty roar, knocking down the pillars in the corridor while it spewed out flames. It was only natural they didn't want to deal with it again. Nobody volunteered for the Taken subjugation team. There was tension among the students. Somebody had to take responsibility. I will take the position. The first person to raise their hand was Taili McClure. Don't say something stupid. I shut down Taili immediately. What did you say? There was still hostility in his eyes whenever he would look at me. That much was expected. You wouldn't be able to handle that lizard even if you die and get reborn. You wouldn't even last a minute. There's no guarantee someone else would be able to do it either. If we had to pick someone to sacrifice, it's only logical for that sacrifice to be me. Taylor looked around. All of the faces he saw were of the ace students of the first-year students. It wasn't every day you would get to see these people gathered in one place, sharing their opinions. There was only one student here who was at risk of failing. Who was like a goose stuck amongst swans. I was sure he was well trained now. But that alone wouldn't nearly be enough to deal with the overwhelming gap between Taken and himself. I'm quick. I'm not sure how long I could run away for, but if we needed a sacrifice, it's only right for me to do it. You must have misunderstood. We aren't here to pick a sacrifice right now. I grabbed Taylor's shoulders and turned him around. I gave him a strong push toward the crowd at the base. Stop making a fuss and get over there. You must be in the team who will deal with Velisper. I looked at Princess Peenia after. I have an idea. I can keep Taken busy until the main force is able to take down Yennecar. What do you mean? Is there even time to explain right now? It's a very long plan, so to speak. The color of Glaskin's summoning circle up in the sky would no longer change. It was now completely dark red. It felt like the disaster that was Glaskin would come out any moment now. There's no need to divide the subjugation force into two equal numbers. I just need two people. One to act as the vanguard, and another for firepower. That was all I would say. I then closed my mouth. What? You want us to come with you, Ed Roth's Taylor, to go take on Taken? Who in their right mind would do that? We might as well just pray to God. Rather than trusting and following you, it would be better to run away towards the barrier's outskirts. The person in charge of the vanguard will be Clevius, who currently keeps on yapping about. What? Why? Why me? Why? I'm sorry. It's my fault. I don't want to die. Dear God, you're so loud. Idiotic Clevius. Nosy Elvira yelled as she grabbed a piece of cloth used to seal alchemy chemicals and shoved it into the injured Clevius's mouth, unable to deal with him anymore. Clevius started groaning through the gag while screaming on and off. As for the person in charge of firepower, Lortel, you will come with me. Me. The golden daughter Lortel looked at me in surprise. As you already know, I suffered a crushing defeat against Taken before, even without the berserk magic. Is that even important? Is there even anyone here who can beat Taken one-on-one? That's true, but Lortel smiled. I also know how precious my life is. In this situation, regardless of who you ask, isn't it only natural to politely refuse? Even though I'm not like that idiotic Clevius. Who are you calling an idiot? I could almost hear Clevius cry through the cloth, but none of the other subjugation force members cared. All right. But your opinion doesn't really matter. That's true too, Lortel coolly admitted. There was only one person who could decide every action and policy regarding the subjugation force. I turned my head towards her. The girl who had the power to decide everyone's actions, the benevolent Princess Peenia Elias Crowell. Please make a decision. Will you trust him? Is there any alternative? Everyone nearby had their attention focused on the princess. The students guarding the base looked rather skeptical. You would be living under a rock to not know Ed Rothstaller's notoriety. I wasn't hoping for a favorable response. Princess, you can't. No, you must never. You can't just trust that guy to take care of things. Gloomy Clevius spat out the fabric in his mouth and shouted in objection. I think it's a worthwhile plan. If there are no other alternatives, let's go with the plan Ed suggested. Because that is the only option we have. The spear from Nature's Eggs was relatively in favor of me. Yeah, it might be better to follow his plan. I'm not sure about anything, but I sure know it's better than doing nothing and getting killed, ahaha. Nosy Elvira seemed to agree with me, but you could tell she was actually in favor of anything. I don't have anything to say. The golden daughter Lortel quietly watched the situation unfold. Quote. Taylor stayed silent. His thoughts must have been quite complicated. At the center was Princess Peenia with her eyes closed, silent herself. Trying to figure out the correct decision among the many differing opinions. The princess had to carefully choose whose opinions to trust, and whose opinions to discard. After contemplating for a while, Princess Peenia opened her and said, "There is one condition. It may be a bit hard to fulfill." Without further complications, the plan seemed to be going into action. "Please don't die. You can't." The subjugation force was divided into two groups. The team in charge of Taken consisted of me, Clevius, and Lortel. And the team in charge of defeating Yennecar consisted of the remaining members. I didn't have any big reason why I chose Clevius and Lortel. I just needed two people to be in charge of the vanguard and firepower position. The people who could have served as the vanguard were Taily, Clevius, Ziggs and Claire. Taily was out of the question and Claire was seriously injured. So it was either Ziggs or Clevius. But it was better to put the stronger Ziggs on the team in charge of defeating Yennecar, as his role was more crucial in the subjugation. I just needed a vanguard who would attract attention, so I didn't really need someone who was strong. That was why I ended up choosing Clevius, who was already injured. As for firepower, Princess Peenia, Lortel and Elvira were my potential choices to be in charge of firepower. Ayla was still a bit too weak to be considered for the role. Princess Peenia was out of the question. She would be in charge of creating the defense to block Velisper's magic attacks during the final battle. That's why she needed to be part of that team. The left Elvira and Lortel. There wasn't much of a reason for choosing Lortel over Elvira. Lortel was known as the bad ending maker during Act 1, so I didn't want to put her next to Taily. That's why I decided to take her with me instead. As a result, the group in charge of defeating Yennecar was Taily, Princess Peenia, Ziggs, Elvira, and Ayla. The group was a lot smaller compared to the original story. But they could definitely win as long as Taily would obtain the Swordsmaster skill. We're cutting it quite close. There was nothing to be worried about. I already considered everyone's stats and who would be the best member for each role, essentially creating the most optimal teams, but, compared to how the story originally went, there were definitely more things to be. There was nothing to be worried about. At this point I have considered all the stats of each member, thought about who would be the best member for each role, and ultimately created the most optimal teams, but, compared to the original timeline, there were definitely many more things to be nervous about. If they couldn't defeat Yennecar, then things would only get more complicated from there on out. But I had no choice but to trust them for now. What's more urgent right now was Taken. Things ended up turning out just like you wanted, Ed. It was late into the night. Sunrise was slowly approaching. The time limit was almost up. The location we were headed to was the entrance to the student center. On either side of it were Nair's Hall and Obel Hall. Shit. Just why did I have to be here? Dear God, please spare my life. Clevius was on the verge of tears. Even though he was acting like this, he's someone who always managed to do the things he needed to do. Even though he was irritatingly screeching like some mosquito next to my ear, he should be quite amazing at being the bait. The three of us stood side by side as we looked at the open entrance to Nail Hall. As soon as we enter the corridor, the battle would start right away. When we had managed to drag Taken out, the group in charge of defeating Yennecar would be able to sneak in behind and enter the combat practice field where the final battle would start. I couldn't believe the battle against both Taken and Velisper would be happening at the same time. I was experiencing all sorts of weird things, getting myself caught up in all of this. It's about time you tell us, right? How are we going to buy time against that fire lizard? We can't. What? Lortel looked at me with an absurd expression on her face. Even Clevius was completely caught off guard. What the hell are you saying? We will die if Taken's fire so much as grazes us. Taken is also ridiculously fast, and we will be in a confined space. The pillars had already fallen down. How could we possibly buy some time? Even if we tried to run away, we wouldn't be able to drag it on for more than 5 minutes. Those are words we can't just easily overlook, Ed. We're risking our lives here. What I'm saying is, I think we can have around 5 minutes, at the very least. I took my dirty school uniform coat off and pulled up my sleeves. You shouldn't think of this as running away. You have to think of this as defeating it. Clevius and Lortel looked dumbfounded at my words. It was a natural reaction for Clevius, but I had never seen Lortel look so puzzled before. She always looked so level-headed. It wasn't a common sight. Seeing it in person was kinda hilarious. Just do what I tell you. As long as we follow my plan, we will definitely win. I waved my arm around, signaling the team in charge of defeating Yennecar. It was to signal that it was time to enter. Chapter 25, Glaskin Subjugation Expedition 5. Taken's roar traveled all throughout the vast corridor of Nail Hall. The sound was sharp like a knife, enough to cut through one's eardrums and make everyone swallow their saliva dry. The vanguard leading the way into battle inside the corridor was gloomy Clevius. Whatever. I don't care. This is the end of my life. He was the top student among the first years of the combat department. Clevius was prone to saying ominous things and was always complaining. Coupled with his gloomy appearance, one couldn't help but think of him as someone who's rather pathetic. However, he was actually pretty resilient in a crisis. Even with how cowardly he tended to act, he was still able to take the top spot in the combat department's first-year students. Although, strangely, he was unsure of his own skills. Maybe it was due to his past, maybe an unfortunate family upbringing or history, but whatever the case, it wasn't what was important right now. What was important was that he was able to withstand attacks at a level that anyone would be in shock of. Wah! He had one of his arms in a splint due to a fracture, but Clevius was running across the corridor of Nail Hall as if it was nothing. Nail Hall was one of the 3 buildings in the student center. It was used as a venue for various assemblies and was also often used as a training field. It was properly managed as it was a building where crowds of people would come and go all year round. To prove this fact, not a speck of dust could be seen on the marble floor of the whole corridor which stretched all the way out. At the end of the corridor, about 50 meters ahead, was a large door that led to the combat training field. It was where the first years and second years held their joint combat training class every year. That majestic door that would normally welcome any student in Sylvania was now being blocked by a massive burning lizard. Just looking into its eyes would flood the fear of the previously attempted subjugation attempt. Taken slowly stood up, letting out a rather sharp ear-shattering roar. Fear began to take over Clevius the minute he saw Taken, his legs trembling. Clevius clenched his teeth as he managed to get his trembling body under control. All of his senses were screaming at him to run away, but he knew there was no positive outcome if he were to throw everything away here. Fortunately, he had companions with him. He didn't need to deal with the overwhelming fear by himself. There was Ed Roths-Taylor, who was, for some reason, overflowing with confidence while still remaining calm. There was also Lortel Cahaland, who was always able to stay cool-headed regardless of the crisis at hand. They were extremely different people compared to Clevius, who was prime to making a fuss and getting scared of even the smallest of crises. Clevius didn't think any of them would be able to deal any significant damage to Taken, but at least he didn't have to enter this hell alone. The fact that he wasn't alone served as solace in this hopeless situation. It's coming. The battle is starting. Now what? As he saw Taken run towards him, the burning lizard spirit looking like it was going to devour him, Clevius looked back at his teammates to ask about the plan. But nobody was there. Clevius didn't look back when he ran as fast as he could. He couldn't afford to pay attention to anything because he was in a state of panic, running with all of his strength. The corridor of Nail Hall stretched out far, and his teammates who should have been running with him weren't there at all. A cold sweat ran down Clevius's back. I got tricked. You tricked me. Clevius screamed, almost in tears. Hey, you crazy shits. Hey, where are you? Come out. What am I supposed to do? Of all people, why'd I have to be the sacrifice, huh? If we were going to do this, we should have just sent Taylor. He already volunteered anyway. SOY me. Ah. Clevius continued to scream in the most pathetic way as he ran like crazy, leaving Taken behind. If he knew this was going to happen, he shouldn't have trusted that damn Ed Roths-Taylor. Clevius would have persuaded Princess Peenia, even if it meant hitting the floor and throwing a tantrum like an immature child. He blamed himself for believing in the commanding presence of Princess Peenia and following this plan she approved of. Why are you doing this to me? Ag. I hate you. I hate this world. Save me. Please, I'm sorry. AGHHH. Clevius running away with tears in his eyes was truly a pitiful sight. Act like we're going to enter with him, and once Clevius is focused on Taken, we will run out of there. He wouldn't agree to this if we just tell him since he's such a scaredy cat. That's why it's necessary we do it like this. The light of dawn was rising from the east. This long night would soon come to an end. Lortel slowly closed her eyes only to open them again. She was in a corner of the student square where she could see the three large buildings, Nail Hall, which Clevius entered, the half-collapsed blocked hall in front of it, and right next to it was a bell hall, which Ed Rothstaler just ran into. Pulling her full focus, she gathered all the magic power in her whole body. Her conversation with Ed a while ago played in her head again. The first step is to make Clevius enter Nail Hall's corridor. So you were just going to sacrifice Clevius in the end. It might not be a bad move, but morally speaking, criticism is inevitable. I wouldn't have said anything if it was such a one-dimensional plan. Lortel focused on Clevius's screaming in the corridor, the sound ringing in her ears. You have the most important role, Lortel. You'll be in charge of securing the entrance for the other group who will defeat Yennecar. You'll also be in charge of dealing the fatal blow to Taken. There was no hint of hesitation in any of what Ed Rothstaler said. In the midst of this confusing, chaotic, and urgent situation, he had no hesitation in making decisions. He had complete confidence in his own plans. Lortel closed her eyes. She had experienced countless crises since she was young, having been in business from an early age. The reason a crisis was because it was unexpected. From paperwork crises and logistics like the halt of distribution or an issue with the cash flow at a store, to a practical crisis like a business competitor's secret or scheme. From Lortel's experience, she knew very well that a crisis was a unique opportunity that gave insight into a human's true nature, as well as their worst qualities. She thought back to Ziggs just before he left the camp earlier. In an unpredictable crisis, he was disillusioned by his selfishness prioritizing his own emotions. She also remembered how Princess Peenia helped Ziggs. She despised the fact that this person, who was supposed to be firmer and stronger than anyone else, made such a poor decision. A person who was truly trustworthy was one who looked for the answer in a time of unexpected crisis, while still holding strong to their beliefs. Someone who wasn't swallowed by fear or swayed by their emotions. And they should be someone who would never doubt their own beliefs. The most urgent thing we need to do is to send the group that will defeat Yennecar into the combat practice field. We can worry about how we can defeat Taken after. So make sure to focus on listening. When you think Taken is far away enough, destroy the wall next to the field to let them in. The key was to keep Taken and Velispar apart. The worst possible outcome would be to deal with both of them at the same time. Phew, well, I think he's showing off a bit too much. Lortel was originally in a position of directing others rather than receiving orders. But currently, she was only a first-year student. Not only that, but she was also in the same class as someone from the royal family. At Eld Company, Lortel had a quite high position that even old merchants would bow their heads toward her. She was someone who made her living in business, so she never had to be in an academic setting until now. But although she entered Sylvania out of a necessity, the essence shouldn't have had to change. A fallen noble. A person on the edge of a cliff with nothing left. She didn't have to listen to the orders of such a person. However, Ed Rothstaler's words had a strange sense of conviction. He had confidence that they would overcome this crisis as long as they followed his plan. This crisis that even a monarch like Princess Peenia was struggling with. The tone of his voice that had no ounce of doubt made it seem like he had already experienced countless crises. Just what was Ed Rothstaler's worst quality? He returned Lortel's 3 gold coins when he shook her hand. As someone who lived in the slums before being picked up by the Golden King Elt, Lortel knew the mindset of someone pushed into a corner. She fully understood just how great of a temptation even a single gold coin was to a person who couldn't guarantee to live another day. Well, I don't think I'm the type of person to jump to conclusions just by hearing mere rumors. Lortel had a giant ice spear floating above her head. No matter how good Clevius was at taking hits or how fast his reaction speed was, Taken would eventually end up catching up. The only way was the aggressive decision to break down the walls of Nail Hall, walls that boasted a long history. It was quite a simple plan, but it wasn't a plan that would come to mind easily. They were students who usually walked around the academic district and visited the student center as if it was their own home. The magnificent Nail Hall was among the academy's pride and was a landmark that represented the student center. They never even considered or thought of it, taking it for granted, as it was a permanent part of their environment. To destroy it with their own hands was something they would have never thought of. But then, wasn't Glocked Hall already destroyed? No matter how many years a building has stood for, it could never take precedence over a person's life. These types of drastic decisions were needed in such a large crisis. It's just a building. They could just rebuild it. Either way, Taken was already going crazy inside anyway, so it probably already suffered a lot of damage. Who would be responsible for such destruction? This wasn't the time to be afraid of such things, but for inexperienced students, making these types of valid judgments was outside of their jurisdiction. The magnificent student center was the academy's treasure, it shouldn't be damaged so recklessly. In this situation, one wouldn't normally be able to make the best judgments, trapped by these rules and way of thinking. But if there was a fire in your home, you would have to break the window to escape. No matter how expensive the stained glass may be, no matter how valuable a piece of art might be, you would have to break that window without hesitation and escape. Destroying an old building like this, Lortel should have nothing to worry about. I can't believe I will destroy Nail Hall with my own hands. When else would I experience something like this? But then again, Lortel had already blown off the roof of Nail Hall once. Having thought this far, she finally understood what Ed meant before he left for Obel Hall. You're good at this type of stuff. Lortel chuckled. Ed Roths-Taylor really was quite an interesting guy. When this crisis is over, should she go and strike a casual conversation with him? Bang! Lortel smashed her ice spear into the outer wall of Nail Hall, nearest to the combat practice field. Dust rose as the thick wall collapsed. She smiled neatly as she saw the other group waiting on the outskirts of the student square. Everyone's puzzled expression was quite memorable. Anyhow, their entry point had been secured. The only thing left to do was take care of Taken. They just had to buy enough time so the other group could defeat Yennecar. It was obvious what she needed to do now. If we do something about its scales, then your magic will become effective against Taken. I'll take responsibility and figured out what to do about the scales, so just gather all the magic power you have and cast the strongest ice magic possible then. Lortel became quite curious about this guy who gave such straight-to-the-point instructions. The possibility was slim, but perhaps she had found someone just like her. Her heart would have skipped a beat if that were the case, but she wasn't immature enough to get excited over such a slim possibility. Lortel quietly began to gather her magic as she watched the group in charge of defeating Yennecar enter the combat practice field. This was 1,000 times better than the commands of that princess who was still naive and easily swayed. Ed's was an unfounded conviction that it would all work out. And if this was the wrong way, then it would all be useless. But at least, right now, it didn't feel that way at all. Kaya, Lortel, I'm going to kill you all. I won't leave you alone. Clevius screamed as he ran out of Nail Hall, Taken almost catching up to him, on the verge of eating him whole. Never mind. I'm going to die. It's too dangerous. Save me. I'm sorry I said I would kill you. I'll forgive all of you. Just please save me. Watching him scream in a pathetic manner, Lortel gathered all the magic power in her body. Bang! Obel Hall was located on the southwest side of the student square. It was a building that Princess Pinia would frequently visit when she became the student council president. It was full of privately owned rooms used as warehouses, along with conference facilities for the student council. It was a place of no importance right now, located outside of the current story. As I ran up the stairs like crazy, I could see the outer wall of Nail Hall collapsing outside the window. Lortel was able to secure the entry point as Clevius ran away in fear. Then I saw the group in charge of defeating Yennecar entering the combat practice field. Having confirmed that everything was going according to plan, I continued my climb up the stairs. Act 1's finale has finally entered Phase 4. The Glaskin summoning ceremony was near completion, and the sun would soon rise in the sky from the east. I thought this would be our last chance. If we were to fail in defeating Yennecar here, then everything that would happen afterward would completely be unknown territory. This was such a crazy situation, the Taken and Velispur battles happening at the same time. It's completely arrogant to have a fair fight against Taken without elemental slash. It would be like trying to burn a person to death when that person was wearing 2 or 3 layers of fireproof clothing. It might be possible to inflict a light burn or have them faint, but if you wanted to completely burn them to death, then there was no choice but to overwhelm them with firepower, or even use magma. But there wasn't a member among the subjugation team capable of doing that. Among the subjugation team, bang! I kicked open the door to Obel Hall's roof. The view of the entire rooftop greeted me, and a familiar witch hat caught my eyes. I would have stopped by a Bell Hall first thing if I had the time, but I had to let the group in charge of defeating Yennecar in first because the summoning ceremony was just about completed. But it's a good thing I got to the roof of a Bell Hall just in time to see this girl here. Everything would be okay now. If we were to discuss the method on how we should break through Taken's scales, we would have to go against the story of Act 1's finale. Instead, we would have to look at the first part of the strategy guide. Phase 1. Gathering your subjugation force. Achievement conditions. Please gather these characters at the student square. The Princess of Benevolence Penia. The Spear from Nature Ziggs. The Golden Daughter Lortel. Companion Ayla. Nosy Elvira. Gloomy Clevius. For additional achievements, also gather Romantic Adele. Lazy Lucy. Senior Maid Belle. Meeting the additional achievement conditions only give a little bit of likability for each character. The characters will not participate in the subjugation. But try to meet Romantic Adele, since she gives a useful buff for attacking the boss later on. If you're trying to 100% clear the stage, Adele can be found playing ukulele in the grass behind the Western Archery Center, Lucy can be found taking a nap on the roof of Obel Hall, and Belle can be found next to a statue in Olin Square. There were barely any players who wanted to clear the additional achievements during the finale's Phase 1. The chapter was already short on time and finding the additional characters didn't mean they would participate in the subjugation, nor was the achievement itself that great in the first place. Additional achievements such as this were usually treated as useless content. But as I had already cleared this stage countless times, I already knew where the additional achievements were hiding. And I knew that among them was a weapon that would completely overturn the flow of the story. In front of me was a grenade that could even break through the scales of Taken. A girl who was able to sleep through the ongoing crisis. A spear that would break through any shield no matter how thick it might be. If you were going against something irrational, then there was no choice but to counter it with something irrational yourself. If someone wasn't playing fair, then that leaves you no choice but to not play fair as well. I hadn't completely finished training yet. And my advantage of knowing insider information wouldn't enable me to defeat Taken. But there was no reason to be upset. This side was in desperate need as well. Bang! I jumped over the handrail and hurriedly picked up Lucy. She was so light that even the piles of firewood I carried every day seemed heavier. EGHK. This girl was taking a pleasant evening nap while the entire academic district was being destroyed. There should be a limit to how lucky someone can be. What? So shaky. It wasn't even daytime anymore. It was already nighttime. This couldn't even be considered a nap at this point. I wanted to ask her why she'd been sleeping for so long, but the reason was pretty obvious so I didn't. For Lazy Lucy, sleeping was a means to restore her power. And given how she ran away from the senior maid Belle last night, she consumed an enormous amount of mana and had not lost her energy. She used such high-ranking spatial-type magic with quick casting. It allowed her to skip the chanting altogether, and came all the way from Ophelis Hall to the northern forest. The only reason she ran out of magic power was because she did something this crazy. She needed to take a break if she wanted to recover that huge amount of mana back. It was very like her to be sleeping on the rooftop of Obel Hall, but now is not the time to sleep. Besides, how many pieces of my jerky had she already eaten? She even ended up breaking my drying rack, something I had painstakingly made. She had to do something in return for it. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. But I'm not that cold-hearted. I took out the leather bag from the reading room and opened it. It was full of strips of jerky. Jerky. Something smells like jerky. She was still half asleep, so she didn't seem like she was conscious just yet. And yet she could still smell the jerky like some ghost. I grabbed a handful of the dried meat and stuffed it into Lucy's small mouth. Eat a lot. I then picked Lucy up once again and jumped over the railing once more. Muff. Mutka. My jaw hurts. Too much. At least, that's what she sounded like. I could see the high-ranking fire spirit talking over the handrail. And running away while crying from it was Clevius, who was excellently performing his part. Meanwhile, I could barely see Lortel, who seemed to be casting the largest ice spear she had ever made. Lucy's magic power probably hasn't fully recovered yet since her capacity to store mana was as deep and vast as the sea. It was likely she had only been able to recover a small portion of it. But that should be enough. Just like how Taken's existence was irrational, Lucy herself was also an irrational existence. Once you're done eating, I need you to take care of that thing's scales. What? I positioned Lucy properly. She couldn't say anything properly because of all the jerky stuck in her mouth. Good thing the target was a lizard on fire, so we could clearly see it even in the dark. Would this distance be enough? There was nothing to worry about. I had already done this a bunch of times in the military. First, check the target. Second, remove the safety clip. Lastly, take out the safety pin and throw it. Everyone, get down. I shouted with a voice so loud it spread across the student center. Then, I threw Lucy over the railing using all of my strength, straight to where Taken was visible. Mumama, Lucy screamed, finally awake. Mafahov Mafmad. I think she said, this is too much. Sorry, Lucy, but from my point of view, this was the only way out. Lucy's screams, impeded by her mouthful of jerky, slowly echoed across the student square the farther she got away. This is too much, too much, too much. There was a moment of silence as Lucy sailed across the sky. And then, it was the high-ranking lightning magic divine judgment. The lightning magic spread around Lucy, covering the entire field. The shock happened in an instant, leaving behind a huge gust of wind that I had to hold onto the railing for support as it flew by. Now that its scales have been blown away, as alone should be enough to take Taken down. I stood and climbed back onto the railing. It was about time to wrap things up. All this while, I'd been worried my plan would fail, but having come this far, there was only one important thing left. It might sound a bit selfish considering the situation, but this was a serious matter. Taken was a high-ranking fire spirit. The amount of spirit-type experience I would get should be enormous. I couldn't let this go to waste. This was, somehow, the most important moment. Last hit. Last hit. I needed to get the last hit. I wouldn't give this up. I quickly ran to the side of the student square where Lortel and Clevius were. I'm so proud of you, my beloved daughter, Yennecar. I'm so proud to be your friend, Yennecar. You're the hope of the second years. You were the only one who properly showed off your skills this joint combat practice. Of course, you can trust Yennecar. Without you, a second years would be the worst year. I'm glad you're here, Yennecar. The memories leaking into her consciousness made her heart ache. Beyond the collapsed wall of Obel Hall, the sky had gradually begun to brighten. In the young girl's eyes, the twinkling stars had disappeared like melting snow. She couldn't help but sneer at herself as she witnessed such sentimental scenery. The number of students who came to defeat her was not as large as she had expected. She quietly stood up from chatting a choral song in the middle of the combat training field. The oak wand she always carried was now stained black. The eyes of the spirits protecting her were different from usual. They were glaring, and those who saw it couldn't help but have their hairs stand on end. Hidden among the many fluid spirits, the low-ranking spirits, and the spiritual spirits, the young girl who was chanting a spell slowly glanced back. Shedding tears, she looked for the face of a certain boy. But that boy wasn't there. That was an obvious fact. The faces of the students who came to stop her were all stiff. Velisper's curse had embroidered itself all over her body like chains that bind her. She gave a regretful smile and quietly kept on reciting the mantra. Welcome. Act 1 Finale's final battle. the subjugation of Yennecar Polarover. Sadly, there wasn't much time left to talk things out with each other.